all nations are held together by story. If you start attacking the story, you're worse than the left or the right. Right? If you don't believe this, that's why a conspiracy theorist is different than somebody on the left or on the right, because they're tearing apart the narrative that these two sides hold so sacred. They hold it so holy that they're like, you know, there's us, then there's them. And even inside conspiracy, same thing happens. Like, you know, oh man, I loved conspiracy when it was about 9/11 or it was about this, that, and the other. Then the flat earthers and the Q-tards started coming on the scene, right? There's always these people where it's just like, man, this is cool. Being edgy is cool. Thinking outside the box is cool, but not them. They're too far outside the box.
Ben, how you doing, brother?
My man, doing real well.
I'm really glad and honored that you agreed to do this. I'm very happy to have you on my show.
Yeah, it's cool. We're using this office for a little bit different than my Waking Infinity shows.
Yeah, this is where the magic happens.
This is where some of the magic.
I watch a lot of your stuff. I really enjoy it. And something that I told you both off camera and on other occasions, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because you have a wonderful way of addressing subjects. You look at something very deeply, you make sure that you're informed about the thing you're talking about, and then you do your best to stay in the middle. You really take a lot of effort to not lean too much in any direction, and you want to make sure that the thing that comes through is your thought process, which is the example that you're trying to set, and it's very clear. And I love that about you, and that's why I want to talk to you, because especially because there's some subjects that I don't necessarily agree with you. So for me, whenever I feel like I disagree with you, it's very clear to me that it's either in the starting position, so like we just have a different impression of whatever this is, or it's in basically what goals we want to strive for. But all of these things are personal preferences. I've never once saw you talk where I was like, this is a unhealthy way of thinking about it. I think there's a healthy way of thinking about things and an unhealthy way of thinking about things. And I think that that's the thing that matters. People will obviously not always agree because, again, people have different predispositions, life experiences, all of that stuff. But I feel like if most of us will move more towards thinking about things properly and constantly being open for revision, we will occupy a much better world. And I'm very happy that people like you exist.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So before we jump into anybody who doesn't know who you are, Aubrey Marcus called you the best documentary producer in the world. You don't remember? That was in the interview I did with you.
Yeah. No.
I've watched quite a few of your things. I have to say that your stuff is very profound. It's very well done, and you can see the improvement arc all the time. Like if I watch your stuff from like a year ago, and now it's kind of incredible. And so tell us a little bit about, before we go into like all the juicy stuff. How did you get to be who you are? Because from what I remember, you told me that you started as a musician,
right,
and then doing documentaries is something you just kind of picked up on the fly, which is even more impressive. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm an Army brat going all the way back. I lived in a new place every 6 months to a couple of years. So I lived in Hawaii, I lived in Kwajalein out in the Marshall Islands. I got to experience just different cultures. And as I was growing up, I was always really into music. And then I got really into sports. And I broke my ankle on a growth plate when I was like 12. And that just, for some reason, pushed me directly into music. And the music that I was getting into, I have to say I was really into whatever my brother was getting into. So he was into a lot of the early 90s music, and I just kind of followed suit. So I got really into like prog rock, things with an edge. I really liked how the 90s went from the 80s, where not that every band in the 80s was like girls, 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 and the world is so great. But in the 90s, it felt like, especially like in grunge and rock and prog, vocalists and lyricists, they got their voice. They were really thinking like, it's okay if things aren't perfect, and it's okay to talk about that. It's actually okay to talk about the pain. And so they were edgy, and I really liked that. And that just kind of led to, by the time I was getting out of high school, I instantly got into the military, but I also at the same time I got into this band called Hyrosonic. We were on Lollapalooza within the first year. We were together for about 10, 11 years after that, and it was great. And so it was our progression of the band and the, lyrical stuff that I was talking about. I didn't even know what I was really doing. I thought I was in a way just kind of emulating the artists around me. But I developed my own style of like what I wanted to talk about in the world. And it was always very much so pointing things out there and showing that the same things are happening in here. And this wasn't a new age stance. It was an artistic, lyrical stance. From that point, I think it was 2007, I took mushrooms and I watched a film called Zeitgeist. And that was a film that it took a big approach to conspiracy. It looked at a bunch of different conspiracies and put it together in like one big storyline. And there were things that I really liked about that film, none of which was the fact that it was conspiracy. It was all the fact that it was free online. There was no name on it except for the text at the end saying zeitgeistmovie.com. It was well edited. It wasn't just free online and thrown up in a couple days. It was really well edited and had a great soundtrack. As a musician, that was primo for me. So at that point, I just noticed what I felt was missing in it. And what was missing was kind of like a spiritual edge and a kind of a cerebral, psychological Tool kind of edge. I always loved in Lateralis how like that album of Tool really just kind of expanded the way you could think about rock. It wasn't just being angry. It was cerebral. It was intelligent. So I wanted to take that kind of approach with a film. And less than a year later, I put out my first film, Esoteric Agenda. That was 2008. And I did about the first hour and 45 minutes of it, realizing that I hadn't even gotten into any of the uplifting stuff. It was all pretty like revisionist history, how we've been lied to in certain ways, and how we lie to ourselves in many ways. But then how also evolution just changes culture over time, and people sometimes live in the past and they're not living in the now. By the last 15 minutes of the film, I was like, I don't want to make a conspiracy film. That wasn't what I set out to do. So I decided to make a twist ending. I always like Fight Club and some of these ones where you think you're watching one film and all of a sudden it switches to another. So then I made this really uplifting part of it at the end, and I really dove into mind science, earth science, the way that we're connected with nature, and I just kind of embellished towards the end. And admittedly, I did the best that I could for somebody who had only just started researching these things. But it was less about trying to be one of the talking heads out there, and it was more about art. Like, I know that I could do it. I could make a film and it'll make a splash. And because I followed those Peter Joseph rules, make a good film, put it out there for free, and don't take a bunch of credit for it. Just watch what happens. And millions and millions of views within the first year. And they were begging, the people who were contacting me were begging for me either to die or for me to make another film. So I chose the latter.
Place to be.
I chose the latter, and I was just like, I'm going to make another film, but it's going to be much more the uplifting, mind-bending stuff towards the end of the first film. That was Kymatica. And that won the New York Independent Film Festival Award. But primarily what that thing did was that pushed me into a career. Before that, I was just a guy who threw something up online, had some success. This time, I had repeated the success, probably a little bit more, and people were asking me to fly around the world and do public speaking. So I was saying yes to all these opportunities. My band was still really busy, so this was one of the busier times of my life before having kids. And that was when I didn't even know if I really wanted to be a filmmaker. I knew very little about how to monetize. I didn't even care about stuff like that. I was just like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And I kind of just said no. I quit. I met my wife in 2012. We traveled for like 2 years before we got pregnant. And that was when I was like, I really got to start thinking about money, doing something like for a living. And Gaia TV, Gaia.com came up and just hand selected me and said, come here, we'll pay you salary to do what you do. And I was just like, I didn't know anyone would do that for the type of films that I'm making, because I only ever do what I want to do. And I say it how I want to. And that was when I decided, like, you know what, Ben, like if you're going to take this craft seriously, build upon it, take this job, see what you learn. I lasted 2 years there. And then since then, I left there once my sister died. And that was when I realized, but you still have to take care of your kids. So you're either going to do this for a living, or are you going to find something else? And I decided to stick with films, and it's just kind of every film has surpassed the previous one.
So first of all, thank you for sharing. How do you choose a subject? Does it usually just kind of arise at this point because there's so much going on and just the next thing kind of comes into the chamber?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to that process. A lot of the times it's just how I'm feeling moved at the beginning of the day. If we're talking about when I'm in this studio making weekly content, it's really just what I feel is relevant, what I feel like I'm always trying to bring people back to the core message, which is, we have so much more brilliant gifts within us that could be explored. And so news always seems to tell you like who's to blame and how you should vote. Very simple, like who's to blame, how you should stay away from it. And for me, I always found news to be very irritating. So sometimes I'll choose an irritating topic on purpose, but I try to show a nuance of it that most people who will just shut down their minds to it will usually just run away, but I try and bring it up in a way that will allow them just at least the opportunity, a window of opportunity to pause and be like, you know what, I never considered that aspect of that kind of a story. Because I think that most people are in reactive thinking. So, I mean, when it comes to a film, oftentimes it's Aubrey Marcus coming to me, this poster behind me for Awake in the Darkness. He came and said, Ben, I had this one filmmaker working on this film. Do you think you could take it over and revision it and do something with it? So that just kind of arrived at me through that channel as well. And a lot of the times it really is like when I can tell something is relevant and it's not going to stop being relevant for the remainder of the year or even for next year, then I try to find the timeless elements of a very timely topic and just embellish them. And then again, bring people back to how can we look at this with a bit more nuance so we're not so reactive and compartmentalizing ourselves inside echo chambers. So it really kind of comes down to self-reflection for me. Like all films, they really do have to do with self-reflection. I try and speak about the mind at least once in every film to show that there are topics that we can talk about, but this idea that there is some fixed, concrete, external reality that we all must see the same, and that institutions are the arbiters of truth in that respect, I feel like we should at least question it because we can. Not for any like poking reason or trying to. I talk about very irritating topics, but I do it specifically to actually reduce the irritant of it and to let's say, expand a little the awareness of what's being irritated and what is irritating about these topics.
Interesting. So that's a really important component for me as well. I don't even know if I ever thought about it explicitly, but I feel like I follow a very similar trajectory, even though my topics tend to be very different than yours, but I do automatically want to focus on the things that are the most universal, because I feel like it's not even a strategic thing. It's just like, if you can see that, why not focus on the thing that drives everything else? Yeah. Or more and more, closer and closer to the thing that drives everything else. So this example you gave is a perfect one, where people live in a world, most people, in which they actually believe that the establishments and the news networks they just kind of gather the thing and then they go through this very rigorous process of just like sitting down for weeks, deciding what in fact are the facts, when in reality, especially now, maybe back in the day was a little bit more of that, but now it's much more just like, okay, what's going to get us the most clicks? Yeah. And that creates a model that just perpetuates the thing that is the most triggering. And like you told me off camera, there seems to be this operative in the middle that keeps pointing the attention of each side towards the other one, saying they're the ones to blame. And then you create this energy in the middle that then whatever entity that is, it can utilize to benefit in many different ways. Because when there's confusion, you can step in and you can clarify things in the way that you want to clarify things. When there's fear, you can come up with solutions. So basically you create the product, you create the need, and then you also offer the product. So it's kind of like the perfect Ponzi scheme. Yeah. And what I think that we are slowly becoming more aware, I feel like more and more people becoming aware of this, is that this is not to be trusted, And now there's an actual void created because a lot of people never spend time actually thinking about these things in concrete ways because they're usually being spoon-fed the information the way they should look at it. So now more people need to become free thinkers. So people like you, when they come in and they help people make sense of the thing and also reveal a little bit behind the scenes of your mind and how you think about these things, I think it's extremely important in this environment because it sets up an example of how this can be done. In a sense, you're teaching people how to fish. You don't give them the fish. And that's something I really appreciate. There was one talk that you did, what was it about? I forget. But it was something that you were talking directly to people that are of the flavor that just like everything you say against what they think is automatically belong to some kind of a conspiracy or it's something crazy. And then you broke it down really nicely. You, if I remember correctly, you said something along the lines of, if you're gonna bury every single statement under just a pile of resistance, obviously I'm paraphrasing here, you are limiting your own growth because you're not allowing for new information to come in, so you're just kind of stuck in this little bubble. And this is something that I think that needs to be presented more and more. So to that, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 things now that we need to focus on, each one of us individually, that point to the more universal? So for me, I'll give you an example. For me, there would be spiritual pursuit, more of like a real, not a thing that you mention to people because you made a post on Instagram, but like actually taking on board a form of spiritual pursuit. That this would be one, because I think it will be very relevant in the years to come, because we have to kind of come closer to who we are as humans versus Americans or culturally or all of that stuff. The other one is that I think more people do need to understand politics to at least some degree, because they are the ones that vote. So they do need to understand some basic things about what is actually happening out there. And the third one I would say is economically. I think most people are just not educated economically. So this would be like 3 for me that I feel like pretty universal and will hold for, I don't know, the next 200, 300 years at least. What would you say would be 2 or 3 for you?
Those are 3 really good ones. You know, when I say something like a spiritual pursuit, I'm sure it might be similar to yours. It's, you know, anything that you strive for that is beyond your comprehension, but in a direction that you don't even have to question or put it into words. You know that this direction feels good and that these compromises don't feel as good. So there seems to be some general attractor. Like for me, I've found myself inside kind of like a craft. And so I want to get better at filmmaking because I'm in that craft, and that's how I better serve others. But also to do so, the topics, I need to improve my mind. And in that, I need to improve my emotional maturity as well. I see a lot of brilliant intellectual people, and you can tell they're emotionally angry. They're consistently upset. And to me,
Richard Dawkins.
there are plenty of them. And so, you know, to stay on point, I think for me, spirituality is definitely one, because that pursuit, that spiritual pursuit, it makes you also it's like an algorithm that is aware that it's not fully aware, or it's aware that it can be fallible. So it has to keep adapting, keep checking, keep growing, keep learning.
So, sorry, I'm interrupting you. You mean in you, or are you talking about in
like
general?
An internal algorithm?
Got it.
I use that terminology sometimes because, you know, it at least somewhat has a correlation. But I guess, you know, so you asked me 2 to 3 things that I think would move people from where they're at towards some more of a universal perspective. I think spirituality is a first principle. It really is. Like, if you're going to really, even if you're an atheist, if you're really going to break down your argument of why you're an atheist, you're going to be touching spiritual territory. You're going to be touching territory that a lot of people think that spirituality automatically means religion, and it doesn't. It's really just this questioning of like, I have this feeling or this notion that there's something so much more to the story, to reality, to myself, to my own potential, to our global potential. By exploring those topics, I think that is, no matter what, that's going to get people to understand the ideological and philosophical foundation that they operate from, because I believe most people operate from a foundation that they're unaware of. They're not aware that they're operating from a foundation that squarely puts them into this camp, and they can't understand why they keep getting lumped in with it. So that's spiritual. Another one would be...
Before you go on to the next one, that's a clarification point. So are you saying that you feel that the spiritual element is fundamental in the sense that it frees you from being attached to a group X? So at any point, you can actually decide to be completely autonomous. Would this be close to what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. I guess just to really kind of... To put simply what I was really saying there was like the detractors of spirituality, the ones who would say like, well, I'm an atheist, I'm not into anything spiritual. I would argue that they have something spiritual inside them. And if they don't want to term it spiritual, that's fine. But I would argue that I have the same thing.
I'm with you 100%. When scientists say, for example, I like to look at the facts, what they're really saying is that for them, they derive meaning. They have a spiritual relationship with looking at things that are, easily calculable, like you can actually calculate it. But there's always like a component, an emotional, there's some spiritual component to it that they don't want to call it that, but I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, and like you were talking like metrics, we feel safe. I would say most people, and I hate compartmentalizing people, but most people that I've seen that are atheists, they're highly intellectual, and I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. But I would ask the question to them, and maybe not just to them, but to others, to ponder the intellectual safety, the feeling of being highly intellectual and sophisticated up here, but emotionally not so much. So the people who I feel that are atheists and highly intellectual, it's safe talking about the facts. And then if you say like, well, whose facts are you talking about? Is it the ordained channels, or is it, a conglomerate of that and independent? And usually they don't like getting into the weeds because they've found their safe space. So they argue from a space of feeling safety and intellectual. I have all my arguments, and anyone who tries to pull me out, I know how to bring it back into the safe zone. That's a wild blanket statement on many people. I would say I had been an atheist in the past, and I would say I am intellectual, and I also operate from a safe space, sometimes without even realizing it. So that's the main thing that I'm talking about with spirituality, is it causes for you to stop trying to bullshit a bullshitter, if you will, when you know inside that you're just defending a point because the person sitting across from you is attacking that point. What are you defending? What is that part of you that's defending that thing? Because oftentimes I've even noticed I'm defending a point that I just heard second or third hand, and I don't even care. But when I'm being challenged, then I have to stand up for myself. What is that part of me that feels like it needs to stand up for itself? By exploring spirituality, we can, I believe, humble ourselves a little bit more to see, oh, I'm playing that archetype, or I'm in that role right now. So we think like me, I'm this singular person. I'll sum myself up very carefully and very tightly. For the most part, I feel like Jim Fadiman said it right. We have a symphony of selves, and we operate from certain ones a lot, and then other ones when we're backed into a corner, and other ones when we're on MDMA and we feel like hugging, when previously we didn't want to touch people. So we operate from many different places. I don't want to tangent too hard. I mentioned the spirituality one. That's exceedingly important. You said economics, and I think that's very important. I just made a film called Game of Money, and I show how money has evolved over the past 10, 12,000 years, and why it arrived at where it is today, and why it's becoming much more technological today. And that's because that, to me, seems like there's a general attractor in this direction. We're using more technology because it does something for us that we find advantageous and useful, and money over time, it became more portable, it became more incorruptible, even though once currency came in and overtook, it just added new kinds of man in the middle attack, inflation. You can print currency, but you can't print gold. So it created new problems. Now, like we're talking about going to CBDCs. Oh, it's going to solve all these problems. Yeah, and it's probably going to create all these other new problems. And so understanding economics is really important, because when most people get super philosophical or ideological or conspiratorial about what really happened in World War II and what all these wars are really about, I just say, look at the economic model. It's free market capitalism fighting against socialism or communism. It's either the state controls more or corporations control more. Both of them have their downfall. Both of them have their redeeming qualities. And I would say if we were an enlightened species, we could use monopoly rules and we would be doing better than what we're doing right now. So economics is really important. And a tied for 3 is either history or it's psychology. And it's not any specific school of psychology. It would be Jungian, Freudian, Skinner. I even liked, forgetting his name, Newman. He wrote the book Art and the Creative Unconscious. But anyway, like the whole field of psychology, to better understand how your own mind operates and how emotions feed into that, how sexual repression feeds into that, as well as history. There's conventional history, then there's alternative history, and there's a lot of arguments there. But if you look at all of it without feeling like I need to believe one of these, do what I think it was Socrates said, be skeptical and open-minded simultaneously. Most people are like, that's a contradiction. No, it's a paradox. It's hard. But if you're...
It's not even a paradox. It's just like the state where you feel the most state. Yeah.
For most people who feel safe landing on a fact as if the fact is safe,
yeah,
I think for them it's a paradox, which means their mind just can't wrap around how these two things can exist simultaneously. Open-mindedness. The extreme of that is gullibility, believing everything regardless of the facts. The extreme of skepticism is cynicism, not believing anything regardless of the facts. So if you can hug the middle, you're skeptical but you're open-minded about everything. That way you can look at conspiracies and be like, actually that has some merit. 95% of this seems like it's people reaching too far for clickbait. Same thing, I could say the same thing for the conventional story. Like, actually, that does have merit. That seems like a talking point. And when you hear this, pundits repeating the line by line, even in the same pacing over and over and over again, you can see like, okay, so they're all kind of full of shit and they all have some merit. It's not as easy as which do you throw away? Do you throw away CNN and MSNBC for whatever's on BitChute? Right? It's more nuanced than that. So those are my 3. So we can drill back down. Spirituality, what did I say? Economy and history matched with psychology. I think
history and psychology is interesting. I'm actually reading. I realize I've never, since I was a kid, I never read any fiction for some reason. I always read, like things about physics and science. And it was very difficult for me to connect with any story, like for whatever reason. And in recent years, I realized that I'm lacking in that sense. I needed to educate myself a little bit more, just to be exposed to the larger literature that is out there. And I started reading a few books that are, just narrative based. So I started reading Asimov. And I think Origins is the one I'm reading right now. And in there's this science that basically is the science. And it's, forget what it's called, but it's basically psychology mixed with history. And it's the science of the ability to predict the future with very high degree of accuracy, the future of humanity.
Totally. And
so it's interesting you saying that. It's like mixing those two, because I do think that history is basically psychology writ large. It's essentially how psychology expresses itself throughout history. And people, there's always going to be people online and they have to argue about the terms. It was like, right. It's actually sociology. It's like, it's what humans do inside applied to a large scale over time. It's what it is. And I actually never thought about this crossroad between them. Do you feel that if we can reform I feel like I know the answer, but I want to ask it regardless. Do you feel like if we reform ourselves inside, so actually let me make the question a little bit more clear.
Okay.
So for example, Charles Eisenstein, our mutual friend, has an incredible vision of a better earth our hearts know is possible, right? And the general premise is that if we allow ourselves to feel the world more, I'm summarizing an entire book here in a few lines, so please forgive me, then we will be able to have a certain kind of a relationship with what is going on, both the ecology, with ourselves, that will allow for a different kind of future to unfold. And he alludes to the idea that actually it's not just how we're going to feel about it, but it literally is going to transform the world physically. So now, holding that in view, do you believe that, I think you brushed up on that very shortly in one of your answers. You said that if we become an enlightened species, then we can rely on monopolies, because essentially the monopolies are going to be enlightened, so we don't have to worry about them about them being corrupt. That was essentially the idea, right? So do you think that if we reformulate most of our visions, we really can move towards types of entities that, just for lack of a better term, aim for good? Or do you think it's this component of it being spoiled is ineradicable, and it's kind of like the push and pull that will happen till the end of time?
You know, it's interesting because it is a little of both. I mean, I do feel that some people they feel too much of a commitment to solving the world's problems. And I agree with Charles, we need to feel the world more before we know how to solve its problems. Anytime my wife comes to me and tells me about one of her problems and I instantly go into fix-it mode, she slows me down and is like, wait a minute, I just want you to hear me. I just need to say this out loud. And I'm like, I get it, I understand. And so that's part of me. I have this like, well, if there's a problem, let's go and fix it. And
it's a very male thing to do. It's
totally.
Yeah.
And so I learned from that. I can see that is a tendency that like I've even tried to squash out of me and it won't go away. So I'm like, okay, stop trying to eradicate a base function of you that you don't even know where it comes from. You don't know much about it. Stop trying to eradicate it. So just sit in the face of that. You want to fix it because it's coming to you and you are receiving what your wife is, and that's your whole world at that moment. What your wife is telling you, you're receiving it as a problem that needs fixing. And I would assume that, you know, what Charles kind of means by this, if we were to feel the world a little bit more, we might understand that like part of the process of transformation is we are so disconnected from how things are impacting others and impacting ourselves, because we're kind of disconnected from how we even feel about it. And we let others and stuff, especially content that we're consuming, we don't realize how subconsciously we're allowing that content to inform how we should receive other information. And when you really take a look at that, then it's like you can start to see the underlying narratives of a lot of the information that's coming to us and realize that there isn't some mustache twisty villain on the other side making them do it. It's actually almost like a neurological path of least resistance. So I believe that one of the best things we can do is calm down the nervous system as we're witnessing something that triggers us. So it really is kind of like what Buddha would say is like, you do not solve the problems out there, you go within. And that's not only highly paraphrasing, but putting words in his mouth. But to me, I believe that we're not really suffering a lot of the political things that we think we are, right? We ourselves, our individuals, we're not really suffering these things. We're suffering our response to it as it arrives to us. Like, you know, I could say, you know, it doesn't matter what politician, fill in the blank, a politician that irritates you. You're internet informed on the person, you never even met the person, but when you see their face, you automatically have this visceral reaction. That is a relationship. It's unspoken, but that is a relationship that you have created between you and that. And anyone, you know, I'll even say something even more charged. Anyone who wants to say that what's happening in the world, you know, with all these fires is because of climate change, you're going to have some people be like, wait a minute, come on, not everything is climate change. And there's merit to that. Not everything is climate change. But then on the vice versa side, you can come out and say like, whoa, wait a minute, like we can't just automatically throw it into that big old category right there. Let's start looking at the details. And then instantly you're like, oh, you're a shill for the fossil fuel companies. And it's like, wait a minute, this is reactive thinking. That is a way of receiving reality that is causing us to immediately process information that comes in into our worldview without even realizing that there's this window of opportunity where we can receive information without that worldview that automatically starts to compartmentalize it. So for me, I like, and tell me if I strayed too far from what Charles was saying as far as like if we can feel the world more and feel it fully, I believe there would be, and I'll add on top of that, feel it fully, absent the death grip of our previous worldview, meaning we really have to be aware of what it is that we're receiving and how we're processing that information. Then a more beautiful world can emerge, and it wouldn't have to be like, well, let's make a list of how to build that world. It would naturally start organizing itself. It's called the mess of freedom. It'll naturally start organizing itself, and people will have a better quality of life because they feel that what we're building collectively as a society is something that they want to send their children into. Nowadays, and I don't believe it's any one particular group's fault, but nowadays, most people do not feel safe sending their children into this world we think we're building. But you have to imagine, what is the implied worldview on that? Is that I am no match for the world, right? The world is turning into something, and what am I gonna do? I'm 1 in 8 billion people. We have all these ways of parsing that information down into a disempowerment protocol. We're consistently disempowering ourselves. When I saw Peter Joseph's film Zeitgeist, I wasn't like, oh my God, they're coming to get me. Or I wasn't like, I'm gonna tell him how wrong he is about these things. I was like, you know what? I can see where he's wrong. I can see where I believe he's right, where I believe he's wrong and where I believe he's right. And I just want to make art. I'm not going to tell him, you should have talked about this and that and the other. No, I'm just going to make a piece of art, and I'm going to do what I feel he didn't. So to me, that is a response I would like to see more people have. Instead of learning about things that are scaring them in the world and being like, well, we need to get angry. We need to get other people angry. We need to shout into megaphones. We need to take to the streets and yell. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Before that, like, what if there was an art revolution? What if we actually brought it down a notch, spoke about it in a nuanced way, and cracked people open of their rigidity, not with force, because force causes people to get defensive, but like, reach them and also call them to a higher standard within themselves, not looking at them like the idiots. The right thinks that the left is a bunch of pedophile, sucking the teat of the industry. And the left thinks that the right is a bunch of like redneck, retarded, gun-toting Trump supporters. There's so much more nuance where we could be speaking to one another in an uplifting and really I see you kind of way, kind of like the Avatar, I see you. Mm-hmm. I know you're not an idiot, and I know that when it comes to whatever topic, we'll disagree about some things, but that doesn't mean I have to view you as the enemy or you viewing me as the enemy. I feel like that's naturally emerging as what the world is headed towards. We're headed towards civil war, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's going to be this divorce, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I would say that if you're trying to make other people rally behind you to go off and do it in this old Protestant Reformation kind of way, like let's witch hunt against the infidel, I think we're going to fail for that.
Oh yeah, because the signature stays there. It's just kind of like cleaning a room. It's a representation. If the room is messy, it's a representation of what's going on inside of you. And the same thing happens. You can test that it's the same system just by cleaning the room. And all of a sudden you feel completely like clear, like things are clear.
Yeah.
And I feel what Charles is saying is obviously much more robust and profound than that, but it's essentially the same principle applied to a much larger scale.
Yeah.
And it definitely applies to individuals. It's like how you react to the situation, because it's a very strong and driving force to be against a thing because you feel it's a cause, you're doing a thing. And sometimes that energy is required when there's actual opposition that needs to be dealt with in a certain way. But I do feel that we're moving towards a world in which setting that up as an example of the primary function is the thing that keeps perpetuating it. So that's the example. That's how you kind of keep doing it. It's almost like, I always say that all the movements that are against things will always end up being either short-lived, or they will overstay their welcome and they will become pathological. And all the movements that are for something, there will always be movements that will achieve a goal because of the focus. If the gay rights movement was for gay rights, feminism used to be for women's rights, then it became anti-men. And the second it became anti-something, now the sentiment is no. So now, even though we live in a world in which there's no comparison between now and 1920s, right? Actually, the 20s probably the women actually had a lot of freedom, but let's say 30s and 40s. The second you have that problem starting to go away, especially because it's gradual and it's kind of like, it's too gradual for anybody to notice really. A lot of these problems don't exist anymore, but the sentiment of against still exists. So now you have to push against something, because that's what I do. I'm against things, right? Versus I want to build something, which requires you to pause, to look at the situation. How am I connecting the dots? How am I doing it? Oh, I need to go on a rally, like a forceful thing. Okay, but it's instrumental. I understand that I'm doing it for something. It's not, let's just go rally. You know what I mean? And I feel that that's really the big difference between how the world was and how the world now can be. But we're the ones that have to set the example. It's very easy to say, oh, these people should have done this. These people should have done that. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to me when I hear people criticize people with enormous positions of power as if they understand what it's like to be in that position. People criticize Elon Musk, they criticize even Trump. It doesn't matter how I feel about these people. People don't realize how ridiculous it is for them to say, people say things like, Elon is an idiot. I'm like, okay. You have a weird definition of an idiot.
Right.
He does something you don't agree with according to what in your imaginary world, what it's like to be in that position. Let me ask you a question. How many things did you mess up today? Now imagine what your life would look like if the entire world would be sitting with a magnifying glass on what you're doing every day. Can you even imagine what you would look like to everybody? It's just that you're invisible. So it's so easy to say these things. So instead of doing that, how about in the small moments that you do have control over, with your significant other, with your kids, with the people around you, that first impulse, can you overcome it? Which is, I feel that you're saying a lot of the same thing, which is, can you overcome it? Can you then step aside and say, hey, can I just be with you? Can I just understand you as a person versus, like you're saying, throwing a label on you because it's safe and I don't have to think about it too much after that?
So this is actually something that kind of will give you a window into how I make film and why I make film. The volatile topic of pro-life and pro-choice. If I were to do a film on that, I would show both sides and I would try to respectfully critique each side well, but not have the audience land on one side or the other. I have no agenda, and this is a big difference between art and propaganda. And art, well, let's start with propaganda. Propaganda is art. It's fashioned to make you feel and believe a certain thing to get a specific response out of you, like vote or something for the nation or whatever it might be. Be fearful of this demographic, whatever it might be. And art, to me, this is my definition of art, the difference between propaganda and art is art wishes to inspire you and uplift you with no investment in how you pay that forward or what you do with that. That was what I loved about Zeitgeist. It was almost just like, I don't want you to know my name. I don't want your money. It's free. It's all my heart, love, and soul art up online. Just watch this and wake up. That's all that it seemed like was being asked of me. And some would say Zeitgeist was propaganda, but to stay on point, to me, art is towing the more of the line of, I don't care what you do with this. I just want you to feel uplifted. I want you to understand what I was feeling. I want you to feel empowered. So for me, pro-life and pro-choice, I would show what causes for us to be so triggered by it, which is this idea when, like, let's say you were pro-life and I were pro-choice. Oh, so you're into death? you know, like, oh, wait a minute, no, pro-life. So you're not into choice. You don't think people deserve a choice. And I'm pro-choice. And you're like, so you're not into life, you're into death, right? When we oversimplify, then it's not the people who come up with these topics or like these labels who are usually a lot more informed about it that use that term all the time. It's the average person that they see and feel something kind of irritating, and they kind of understand what pro-life and pro-choice means, and so they throw it on there as a pejorative, as a way to actually poke at other people. In the same way, anti-vax. So anti-vax is a term that's been thrown around a lot lately, and there are some textbook definitions of it, but if you look at the colloquial use of it, the social use of it, you can see that it's broadened and broadened and broadened its definition base to mean anybody who doesn't go along with the official CDC FDA narrative is anti-vax. Anyone who hesitates, anyone who has a question about it, anyone who's like, well, can I at least look? You have a federal database showing numbers. Why don't I hesitate, look at the numbers? Because you're giving it to us so we can do our own research. It's not private data. You're making it public facing so I can look at it. I have some questions about what I'm looking at. I'm anti-vax all of a sudden because I have some questions. And same with anti-science. Then anti-science was thrown onto it as if those who are pro-vaccine are the only ones who appreciate science, and everybody else is just some superstitious religious zealot on the right that voted for Trump. You see how, like, when you start using these terms, then all of a sudden the terms get attached to political figures and movements, and it's that economic divide in us, because this left-right divide, they're still really arguing over what's the economic model that's going to come in. How much authority does the state have, or how much authority does the private sector have? So for me, instead of, I love getting into the weeds, because the reason why I made conspiracy films that ended with something very uplifting was because it's the same way ayahuasca seems to work on these very powerful experiences, is they don't just bliss you out and the entire time, oh, it was so great, I was just laying on a beach in Fiji, I felt like the whole time. Like, no, I faced my demons, but I overcame it, and now I'm in bliss. Those are the really powerful experiences that I hear from people replete. Anyone who's had a really powerful experience, they went through the difficult part. So in my films, I try to treat it as such. Let's talk about the shit that's not that comfortable to talk about. But instead of thinking, oh, he's gonna make me land on this side, or he's gonna make me land on that side, I don't do that, or that's not my intention. My intention is, fuck, I'm more informed on this side and that side, and now I don't know where I stand. That's where I would prefer you to be than like, oh man, I'm totally convinced. I watched Ben's film and now I'm totally convinced. Like, no, I don't want you totally convinced after you watch my film. I want you a little bit more informed and a little bit more empowered, and also a little bit calmer, so you don't feel like I need to be convinced about a worldview so I can feel safe on the inside.
Do you want to make people comfortable not being decided or fully know, and be okay to live in that state? Because that's really what life is about. Because I feel like a lot of these things are just heuristics that people can handle. Mm-hmm. Because it's easier to throw a label on something and say, oh, I get it, it's a that. And then I'm reacting to that. And mm-hmm. then whenever I hear it, I'm like, oh, I know what it is. And I do feel that there's a problem of education here, because not everybody are capable and know how to do the research and actually go into the details. And if we have to be frank, the truth is that there's so many ways to look at the same data, and statisticians would tell you that, like, scientists having a really hard time going through certain data, and let alone people who were never trained to do that. So they need a label. And I feel like the more we have people like you and other people in similar spheres that allow for this more balanced way, presenting this more balanced way of going through information, it basically teaches people how to feel in the space of uncertainty, and how you can actually allow yourself to be informed from both ends and not feel triggered by either, and just allow yourself to see, like, for me, this whole, obviously we need the left and the right just because we need some kind of a pressure entity in politics to move things. But we want to strive towards a world, I feel, that allows even people in power and politics to address issues on their own merit versus wait, was this proposed by the left or was this proposed by the right? That's ridiculous. Who cares? Like, what is it, that thing? One of my favorite books of all time is The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. And this was one of those like critical moments for me because I never in my life experienced being spun on a dime about a subject that I believe so strongly about like that. It never happened to me before. I was like, holy crap. That's the power of a good argument. Because he was talking about global warming. And as a good liberal, I was always on the right side of the argument, which is all the liberal stuff. Like, who the fuck are the idiots that don't see that we're doing this to the planet, right? That attitude.
Yeah.
And he was like, it wasn't both sides. He's a scientist. He said, look, arguing whether global warming is caused by humans and therefore because of that we should do something about it is as ridiculous as trying to solve only disasters that are man-made. So if there's a hurricane or a tornado coming, we shouldn't try and mitigate the situation because it's not man-made. Who cares? There's problems. Problems are soluble. Let's focus on how we're solving the problems. The amount of, and then he kind of went through like how much budget is being spent for advertising the fact that it's caused by man and therefore we're bad and like that whole thing. And I was like, holy crap. It's right on the surface.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see it. And I was like, change my mind. Like, I don't care if it's man-made. How do we, now, if the solution involves us taking steps because of what we're doing to change that, it becomes relevant, yes. But the guilt trip with it makes no sense. Yes, we messed up, okay. Okay, but how do we, but so much is, if you look at the actual conversations, most of them takes the form of, do you believe in global warming or not? Who cares what you believe? Let's look at the stuff. Let's look at the actual thing. The blame doesn't make any sense. And I feel that is something that is intrinsic to the to what we call human nature, but I don't believe it's human nature. I believe human nature is whatever it in fact is in that moment, and it evolves all the time. So maybe it was human nature to be tribal for a long time and xenophobia because of what was required for thousands of years. Okay, but it's no longer required that much. How about we start aiming towards moving away from that attitude and not automatically saying, well, you know, it's in the genes. Okay, there's CRISPR. Let's change it in the genes then. Like, there's so many ways that you can actually change what in fact is. And this is why I also feel that the broader strokes help bring things into view for what they really are. Because whenever people say things like, well, this is natural, this is unnatural, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek that I do this at this point because it's just like the argument is so stupid to me. But I always say, does it exist? Yeah, well, it's natural then. It's in the universe, right? So us making plastic and being all the bad stuff that you think is natural. It has nothing to do with us understanding what a better life and a worse life is. And we should only look at the things that we know will move us, or we understand to a certain degree will move us towards the world that we believe is more beautiful, which starts with the attitude, which starts how you talk to the other person, which starts how you make them feel in the room. Nobody is happy just because you gave them all the facts. Yeah. People feel happier and more joyful when you actually see them, when you actually interact with them in a certain way. So anyways, that's something I feel like we really agree on there. But, I want to make a slight segue towards something much more out there, but I heard you talk about it and I was very excited to ask you about it in person. As part of the stuff that you're doing for Gaia, there's this show that you always do with, I don't know this, is it with the other guy that you guys have a conversation? Is it Beyond Belief?
Yeah,
okay.
George Nori on Belief.
I never know what it's called, I just see the clips.
Yeah.
So in one of the clips that I saw, I guess we can, to make it a smoother transition, we can just talk about like the future of humanity, right? But there was one point in which you guys were talking about your beliefs about what this thing is, like, you know, the larger scale, this thing. And then you said that you believe that a lot of these communications that people seem to be receiving either through UFOs or through some other unexplained phenomena. You said that your conviction is that these are us from the future. And this is something that I've heard Dennis McKenna talk about, and I've obviously heard it before. I've seen some things myself that might point to that to a certain degree, but I wanted to ask you, what was the thing, what landed you there? What landed you in that space?
Yeah, that's a good point. And to be honest, it's not like I haven't heard that from other people before. Even I think it was even Aleister Crowley who was mentioning that maybe aliens are us in the future visiting ourselves. I like what that does to you when you consider it. And to me, the reason why I landed there is because for me personally, I get guidance in my own voice, and I get guidance in other voices sometimes. And I'm talking about specific voices that I hear in my head. Sometimes it's female, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? And yes, I know what I'm saying is there's voices in my head, but like when I'm in meditation and I ask a question, oftentimes I'll get visuals in front of my eyes. That doesn't mean that like I'm going insane. That means that there's something that just happens upon my visual field. Same thing with the auditory field. And sometimes it's my voice, and sometimes it's a little different, and sometimes it has a radio, like a literal, like a radio squawk to it. Mm-hmm. But
sorry, I'm cutting you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever notice when that happens, if there's an ambient sound of some sort in the room? So like it can be the shower fan or something like that. Did you ever notice that?
You know what a flanger or an envelope. It's kind of like a chorus or a flanger effect on voice, like reverb, chorus,
yes.
Flange. So that enveloping sound is something that I would hear in the background, almost with a pitch to it, like slowly going through gradients.
Do that again? I'm going to show you something.
Up and down, flanged kind of sounds. So that's some of the nuance. To answer your question, why did I land there that we're getting guidance from ourselves in the future? It lends itself to a few things that I have researched that my mind can toy with. And then it rests upon something deeper than language that you would say is just an anthro-ontological knowing. It's a felt sense of knowing. So I don't have to question it, nor do I believe I'm infallible and I'm just right and other people are wrong if they disagree. I believe it's us from the future because technically I like toying with, not even pretending like I understand quantum mechanics, but toying with retrograde causality and that concept that has been seen in some studies where the near future can affect the now and the now can affect, and it might just be, again, a worldview and a framing of it to make it seem like it actually happens ago. I don't know. But this concept that like, what is time? And if we do have this thing called a higher self, and we can get guidance from our higher self. I know that right before car accidents, one time, I shouldn't say accidents, right before a car accident, and during really, really big kind of decisive moments in my life, there's this kind of other presence that I feel is me, but it's like a Ben. It's kind of like a sit down moment. It's like, I'm going to tell you what this moment means, and it's up to you how you move forward with it. So it's kind of another way of me saying it's my higher self, which lives outside space and time. But it's also kind of this, I mean, if you take a look at that, something that lives outside space and time, it would then not really be worried about like causality, like this caused that, then caused that, then caused that. It's more or less of like your state of being and what you're manifesting, how your state of being begins to manifest. And so when I said we're receiving guidance from ourselves in the future, that's kind of to call us towards this notion that we can toy with. It's a framework that is useful. It's a tool to put yourself in this notion where you're like, okay, myself from the future is giving me advice right now. Connect with that. And I believe that's a useful tool to actually get in touch with hey, how do you really feel? Should you take this job or take that job? How do you really feel? It's almost just like another way of like, okay, but add another element. I'm not just asking you how you're feeling. You in the future are calling back to you. What would that you say? I do this when I'm really stressed out or I'm having a moment with my kids that is even really beautiful. And then all of a sudden I'll place myself on my deathbed. I'll have this moment where it's like, should I get up and start working? They're playing peacefully. Should I just get up and start working? And then I'm like, and avoid my kids right now? What would me on my deathbed say? And it's this psychological tool to get me to ponder, where do my values lie? I could go and work. Will I on my deathbed be like, oh, thank God I got up at that moment and I edited those last 3 lines and I hit export. I saved myself 55 minutes right there. Or would I say like, Ben, you are so in it right now. You're so in love with just watching your kids play right now. Just sit here. Just sit here for a little bit. And neither one is right or wrong, but it's a useful tool in order to orient yourself towards what you already know. You already know the answer. And I fully believe most of us, we already know the answer to some of the bigger challenging questions, choice points or forks in the road. We really do know what the right answer is. And even if we're like, all right, I feel the answer and I'm going to move in that direction, even if we experience pain, that doesn't mean it was the wrong choice because we learned from our pain. When I left Gaia, I had twin boys on the way, and I won't get into the nuances, but I left the salaried job for a contractor job, and as soon as I left salary, the contractor job went away instantaneously. So I was in this free-falling space. And about a year later, we were in our friend's basement. We were living in our friend's basement. Less than a year later, right? Maybe like 4 or 5 months later. And I was like, babe, I feel like such a loser. I'm just going to go out and get any job I can get just so I feel like I'm doing something. And she was like, Ben, this will pass. And if you give up on filmmaking to go do something else, you'll be happy for 3 weeks. And then you'll become miserable. And then I'll be miserable. Stay the course, because I know you're only going to be happy if you do what you know you were born to do on this planet. You're already following your path. I trust you. I just want you to trust you. That was her saying what I knew to be right, but I needed her to echo it back. So that psychological tool of we are getting guidance from ourselves in the future, there may be actual literal merit to that framework, but I use it much more as take out the question of thinking that that's either right or wrong and just use it as a tool and see if it's useful. I think that's a much more useful framework to build from than, but what if I'm wrong and that wasn't myself from the future? It's just like, it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. Utilize it as a tool. Does that feel like you're centered more on the direction you should take? Awesome. Because guess what? You're never going to get absolute validity. Oh, 100% right. Because I made that right choice, it's 100% right. That was myself from the future. Forget about trying to figure out those little nuances which really don't matter. If it's a useful tool, it's a useful tool. So that's why I like things like the 7 liberal arts, the trivium and the quadrivium. It's just a framework by which you can organize information into a worldview.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is using that as basically a frame through which you view situations is a useful tool. And then when you're called upon using more concrete tools, you can do that. If the question actually is like you're getting some kind of a signal at some, like some weird scenario, like you're picking up some kind of a signal on the radio and you have reasons to believe it's like people from the future.
Right.
Okay, that's a different kind of thing. But here you're talking about like it's more like a psychological tool to actually help you go through certain situations and have the confidence in these situations, because it's always easier when when whatever you already know is being reinforced by something seemingly from the outside. And I wasn't taking it as like you just convinced of that.
Oh, I know.
I was just curious because I did see some actually pretty concrete hints that it's not exactly us from the future from what I'm seeing, like from my perspective. It's more, well, actually in some ways you can say that, but it's just that there's so many other things there in the same space, which I guess you can call the future, and I don't see those ever really talked about in detail. So that's why I was wondering from you. So
well, and to me, like, what is the future? Is it manifest? I mean, these are questions. With questions like these, I like to remove people's conviction that they know the answers to these questions. I'm not driving.
If somebody's saying he knows, I would be very suspicious.
So I'm driving towards this more kind of nuanced view where I am aware that there may not be an answer to the thing that I'm asking, but there's a utility to asking the question.
Yes.
What is the future? And I'm not trying to prove that that's me from the future talking to me. However, it is useful, and there may be some legitimacy to it, because what is the future? What is the past? Is the past still evident? I mean, like it is in the rocks and the trees and stuff like that. But is that the past, or is that the now, the present right here? What is the past and the future? To me, to answer those questions, you have to drill down into deep, deep philosophical frameworks that most people, they skip step one and they start from premise 2 or 3 or 4. And I think Terence McKenna said, science, when it comes to the origin, like the origin of the universe, that science would technically say, grant me one free miracle, and then I'll explain the rest. Mm-hmm. Just grant me the miracle that, okay, there's a miracle, everything started somehow, I don't have the answer to that, but I can explain everything in existence, and science can do that. I can put a metric to it and I can explain it, but I can't explain that. Why? Because we don't even really know what past and future really mean. We have this evolving present, we have memory, it causes these constructs like past and future. And for me, I'm not even the perfect adept at really, exploring these topics. As an artist, this is what I love. I can get into these heady topics. And then when I reach, either a conversation or somebody who is drilled into some body of work that I know, okay, this is vast and beyond me, I'm just a filmmaker. I'm an artist that is very, I'm an avid reader. I love reading. I love researching. I love knowing more about what's going on in the world. I love looking at sides of arguments that I've never seen before, which is what got me into conspiracy. I love now because the algorithms simply think that I'm right-wing because I'm a conspiracy theorist. All of a sudden you get thrown into right-wing if you're a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, no, remember when conspiracy was about like reading history and some new age stuff? Like nowadays it's just right-wing extreme talking points. I'm like, that's annoying. So for me, I'm looking at Ezra Klein and Destiny. I'm looking at a lot of I'm listening to a lot of voices on the left. And Vosh is another one. I don't agree with...
What is Vosh? I don't know.
Vosh is just... I don't even know if he has another name to go by. He was interviewed on Tim Pool about the vaccines with Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA. And I agreed with Charlie Kirk, but I didn't like his voice or his tone, kind of his attitude. And I loved Vosh's tone and attitude and his way of speaking and his mannerisms. And I couldn't stand some of the premises he was working from. And I noticed that most of us, we just find our camp. Subconsciously, we find our camp. Who do I feel most comfortable with? And then I will support those talking points. I'm actively trying to tear down my own talking points, because if I have a talking point that has somebody being able to attack it, I'm like, I want to understand you. I don't even give a fuck if I'm right or you're right. I want to understand you, because all those details, those are details. You're a human. I'm a human. We have power. These ideas get in the way of that. And especially they get in the way of us coming together and building a more beautiful world. So oftentimes I'm in this catabolic phase with my films where I'm trying to break people's confidence down from their convinced islands of information and show them you're internet informed on these things, and it may not be a useful tool for you to just be convinced about this one belief and not be open-minded about other things. So I'm trying to get people to do really their inner work and just open up the aperture a little bit so you can let a little bit more light in, and you can acknowledge, I don't even care if it doesn't change your view on the outside world, if it just makes you feel more empowered. I even think not being so convinced about something you were convinced about in the past is empowering in and of itself. Because
that's the thing I always aim for. That to try, I don't always succeed, but I do my best to try and stay in this position where everything I believe till this moment, like, can if Arnold runs through the door right now and tells me, come with me if you want to live, can I drop everything I thought I knew if that moment feels right? That's what I'm aiming for. And it's interesting that you said that your reason, so I do the same thing. I always, in my head, I automatically, like if I'm convinced of something, I always think of all the possible arguments against that. And then I play this game back in my head. So by the time I get to a conversation, I already understand the other talking points. But it's interesting because look, your emphasis is very different than mine. And much more beautiful actually, because you said that your emphasis is like you want to understand the other person through that if they're making the same point. To me, the point was always just to be prepared. But not in the sense of winning the thing. I guess it's because I really care about what, in the old sense of the thing, about the truth. So I want us together, that's my form of communion, I guess.
Yeah.
I want us together to arrive at the truth. That's the most exciting to me.
Yeah.
But I guess the human there is another, like I always connect to the human, like if we're together looking at this thing. And again, you know, we can psychoanalyze me and say it's part of a trauma or whatever, but it's, notice that the function is the same, but our focus is different. And I feel like a lot of the times when people are having conversations, this element is being overlooked. And so now that I'm aware of that, I'm always trying to see, I guess that's my way of understanding other humans, is what is it that is operating, like you say, what is that thing that they feel safe in? What are they actually defending? What are they actually saying? And because behind every statement about facts or about spirituality or whatever it is, there's the me experiencing this thing, and my conviction about what it is the thing that I'm really defending.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I even offer that little caveat in a conversation, it immediately cools things down, because then I'm not trying to like, look, I'm eliminating the possibility that I'm trying to play a game with you. And I'm just saying, look, this is where I'm coming from. This is why. This is what I'm trying to understand from you. Correct me if I didn't see your point of view properly.
Yeah.
And obviously when, you know, around certain subjects, it's harder to do. One of the closest to, I guess, to my heart that I can think of is the whole dichotomy between what people would call transhumanist and the earth-oriented, we are off the dirt kind of attitude, right?
Naturalist, purist.
Naturalist, yeah. Purist, right? And I come from, like, I always wanted to be in the stars, right? It's just my attitude since I was a little kid. And I love the idea of us colonizing the galaxy and all of that stuff. But in order to get there, you have to go to what people call transhumanists. You won't be human anymore. You will be something else. But I feel it's beautiful because consciousness will experience more things that are like that's the sentiment. Yeah. But now and so for me, if I have to search in myself, whenever I would hit people, probably more like I don't know if like you, but definitely more like Charles, for example, that are much more like, you know, let's first focus here and fix this. It always feels like, even though now I understand it will absolutely be a necessary step, if you do want to step into the stars, you definitely have to get your shit together here first.
Yeah.
So, but even though I understand that now, there's always this like almost like a recoiling, which is like, why are you limiting us? Like, why are you limiting us to this here, right here? But then the deeper I went into this, I realized that's just my own personal bias, because for whatever reason, I live there. So the second you express a sentiment that is not somehow in any shape or form aimed at that, it does a thing to me. I'm like, oh, can you not see how beautiful it is, right?
Yeah.
And then the other person will probably say, how can you not see how beautiful it is here? So I realized that there has to be, first of all, the fact that all these attitudes exist points to the fact that, because, you know, you can't argue the fact that we are whatever the universe is doing from where we're sitting. You are, I am, all of us. So the fact that all these sentiments exist, they're for something, right? I don't want to get into teleology, but like it's for something, right?
Yeah,
it has a function.
Direction.
Yeah. So I arrived at this picture that it helped me now arrive at these conversations in a much more open-armed way, which is that you will have, especially now that we seem to be entering some kind of a stage of real transformation, there will be a lot more of the people who like fully go into like, okay, let's fix the earth, let's do that, right? Because somebody is going to have to stay home. Somebody is going to have to tend to home, so we have a cozy home and we take care of it and it's beautiful always, right? But at the same time, you're going to need the explorers. You're going to need the people who go to Mars and beyond, and to, right? Because we do want to, eventually the star will become a red giant. So it's just a matter of time before we have to pass that intelligence test. That's not a question. It's just a matter of when. So you need both of these sentiments operating at the same time, and they don't have to be one instead of the other. And when you look at it closer, you know, it's the caricature version of that argument, for example, is like, why are we focusing on Mars when we have so many things to fix here? Like, that's not mutually exclusive. The number of things you're going to learn by trying to go to Mars, you can apply it for global warming. You can apply, there's so many things you learn by trying to do hard things that are applicable across the board. That's first of all. Second of all, we will need the people who wants to go out there. So now when I'm approaching the situation, I'm like, oh, here's a person who will probably, I don't know if unless we live for a very long time, but our kids, grandkids for sure, will experience things that we can't even fathom. And I'm happy that there are people that will make sure that when people want to go back and visit home, it will be worth visiting. So that kind of allowed me, but I had to go through a very long roundabout inside myself. And for a long time, I would never notice. There was just a bias I hold because I just have this predispensation to like that idea versus the other idea. And when I sunk deeper into what might the thing represent in the largest scheme of things, is when I dropped the guard and I managed to listen to the thing. But I really don't understand when people like, they just hunker down. They're just like, no, like it's this. Yeah. Like sometimes I would watch Charles. Charles is one of my favorite speakers at this point. I love his mind and books. I remember he was recording this video and he was looking into the phone and he was behaving as if it's like he doesn't even know what it is, and he was like, I'm looking through this weird technological thing.
I saw that one, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that's odd. Like, but it allows you to do this with other people. So like, and I actually asked him about this once, and he said, I asked him about this vision that I just expressed to you about like going to the stars. He's like, I asked him, don't you think that we should also aim to do that? And yeah, basically he holds the position that I thought he does, which is like, sure, but you have to focus here first. Like you can't go there and expect for good things if you can't even do this properly, right? So I was like, that immediately made me understand, okay, so there's just it's an emphasis in time thing and not anything else. Something I want to bounce back for a second because I forgot to ask you about this. Something that I personally, let's do this is going to be you doing an exorcism on me right now, because I saw you doing these videos about Hawaii, right? And I found myself being reactive, not to your videos. Before that, when people brought this to my attention, I immediately went into like a slightly, like I think I also woke up that day on like the wrong side of the bed, and somebody sent me this video, one of the first videos that came out about it, and I immediately brushed it off. I was just like, dude, like enough. Like I can't, like I think it was like a week also of people like coming up with all kinds of things happening aside from Hawaii. And at that point, I think I had like a breaking point. I was like, why is everything a conspiracy? Like enough already. Like can't we just like live for a second? So I had that moment, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about this because when I saw you made a video, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe there's something to it. And then I watched it. So walk me through what made you think that there's actually something there. What were the main components that drew you into this subject? Because I have to be honest, and if you manage to convince me right now that there's something else there, apologies, Kirsten, for I even said like we don't have to entertain everything silly. So convince me it's not silly. Why was there something there that you felt, no, this is really worth looking into?
Yeah, so first and foremost, when it comes to conspiracy, it's such a broad topic. You know, it basically means the root of the word is two people breathing together, which is Hawaiian. If you think about it, they put their foreheads together. But conspiracy in a colloquial term is basically people colluding in secret for power. And I know these things get very irritating to people to watch because there's so much of it these days. I just don't seem to be so triggered by it. I can watch conspiracy all day, not that I want to, but I could watch it all day and easily parse, like, this is way too much. This is super far-fetched. This isn't even really branching into the details. I can see every time that they make a logical leap between this and that's what the whole thing rests upon.
It's because you're not being emotionally hijacked.
Right. So, I mean, to me, I've made conspiracy films. I've also rehabbed myself from conspiracy, and which means a lot of the things I once thought I don't anymore, and some of the things I believe more now than I did when I were saying them back in 2008. And one of them is Agenda 21, which is, you could just look it up. It turned into Agenda 2030. It's Sustainable Development UN goals. And the first thing I want to say is, before people just say, "Oh, I've heard all about this before," my take on Agenda 2030 is there are elements to it that are non-conspiratorial. Why wouldn't you have sustainable development goals? Why wouldn't you have a UN? I get all these things. It's a specific nuance of it that I think is not being shown and expressed, and it could be. And in fact, we would be adult enough to take the face value truth of it. But people wouldn't agree. Therefore, there has to be deception on it. So I'll drill it down to the Maui thing. I started watching it, and the first thing I saw was this thing on directed energy weapons started the fire.
With the lasers thingy?
With lasers. So my first thing was, I don't believe it. I don't buy it.
Because why, right?
Why, I don't believe it yet. That's always how I started. I don't believe it yet, but I'm going to keep watching. And to be perfectly honest, I don't fully believe it now. I just don't believe it's outside the realm of possibility, and I'm comfortable with talking about shit that I want to entertain, because I want other people to entertain it as well, so they don't feel like, oh, that's Star Wars shit. We're living in Star Wars.
No, it's possible. Let me say it very clearly. It is physically absolutely possible.
So I don't fully believe that it was directed energy weapons, because the only leap that you can make between having that belief and what evidence there actually is that in January there were green lasers coming down from a satellite over Hawaii. It was proven. It was all over the news. Yeah, it's all over the news. Green lasers scanning the sky over Hawaii. It was then said on public news that this was a Chinese satellite scanning for air pollution, for how their air pollution migrates. And then we started having all those balloons migrating that we spent $500,000 shooting down.
Isn't this something that we have to approve for China to do?
That we have to approve?
Doesn't it violate some kind of a treaty that they are snooping around in our area for whatever it is?
Well, so there's so many agencies involved that what is approval and how did a balloon
the same way that they can't just enter our airspace. So, okay, there's an agency responsible for that, but I'm sure there's somebody supposed to, because we don't know if it's going to be for, espionage purposes or whatever. So somebody has to approve it in the American government.
For sure. And I think everything above board happened here. I actually think those green lasers were probably a satellite scanning something. I have no idea. There are other explanations that I can get into.
But you're saying that happened. That's the.
Well, there's video footage of it, and I've seen the news, the news anchors saying like, "Oh, we finally figured out what this is. It's a Chinese weather satellite, or it's a Chinese satellite scanning for air pollution and how it migrates from China to LA, because apparently 25% of LA smog is imported from China." So. There are green lasers that did come down over Hawaii back in January. And then there were balloons and there were all these things. So can lasers be up there? Yes, we've already seen the proof of that. When it comes to Hawaii, here's what I did. Every time massive amounts of infrastructure is destroyed in a short amount of time, my mind instantly goes to, I have to at least check to see if this might be Agenda 21. I have to, because the whole thing is, how are we going to put all people of the world inside megacities, smart cities, now they're being called 15-minute cities, to let nature bounce back to where most of these wildlands, farmlands, stuff like that will not be accessible to the average population. You have to stay inside your zone. How would that be monitored? Not just satellites, but CBDCs, which is a digital form of currency, which means if you pass your zone, nobody has to stop you. Your money doesn't work anymore. Your phone doesn't work anymore. And this is stuff that is already in China. This is stuff that is being proposed right now in September, where we will have a personal account with the Federal Reserve Bank. No more regional banks. You remove that buffer zone. You remove that free market diversity, and you have the Federal Reserve giving us an account which can, and they've done this in China, can put an expiration date on your money, meaning no savings. They can say, well, you can buy these things, but you can't take a plane trip because you have too much carbon on your, you've done too many Ubers, so you can't do that. No more buying gas, no more buying red meat, all these things. And believe me—
too much control by the system of the individual.
Yes, so I understand that most of the information I hear about CBDCs and Agenda 21 is coming from these uber right-wing extremists, if I can call them that. Yes, there are conspiracy theories, and I have to wade through that to pick up information that will not be told to me through conventional. So back to Maui. The first thing I did was I looked, how could this possibly be connected with Agenda 21? Not because I'm trying to bend the narrative that it definitely is Agenda 21. So I start with the premise that I don't know. But in January—
So right before you get into that, in that juncture, in your decision tree of what to look into, does it not— obviously you should keep looking, but I don't hear you mentioning this. Does it not play a role for you that it's a lot to assume that the people who wrote that agenda will also, in order to save the biosphere in their minds, they should be okay with potentially killing a lot of people? Like, you have to entertain that to be the case?
I entertain every theory that I resonate has any merit whatsoever. Even if it's like, oh, I don't think that's happening here, but I wouldn't doubt it if that tactic isn't being used somewhere else.
Or maybe they wanted to go for it, but they didn't get out of control. Like, they just wanted to burn the houses. Well, anyways, I'll let you proceed. It's just that the thing for me, so I'll just be very transparent. The thing for me there that kind of sits like this, kind of like doesn't fully run through, which is that if they are okay to do that, I would have a much harder time believing that it's just they're complete psychopaths and they're okay with killing people. So they would create some evacuation plans in advance. But then the whole story was that they actually locked them, like they wanted them to die. But anyways, I'll let you address that. But like,
so please understand that I'm not super convinced about what happened.
Okay.
But I am going to talk about the theories that aren't being given enough weight because nobody's speaking about them in a nuanced way. You're getting TikTok videos saying energy-directed weapons burned them all down, and they're so angry that they're pointing the finger like this is definitely a conspiracy. I'm asking the question because, like, you seem like a reasonable person. I'll lay out the evidence for you, and I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other. I'm just trying to show you why I think it's legitimate to raise the topic so people can hear something outside of the mainstream, like legacy media narrative.
Fair enough.
So I'm very, also on my shows, I'm very open about my thought process and how I arrive at the places that I arrive at. I've been studying Agenda 21 for a long time. I knew this agenda existed back in 2007, and I started seeing what the whole plan was. Then I started seeing it playing out. And so when I see infrastructure being torn down, it doesn't matter what what the actual reason is. Infrastructure comes down, and then it's rebuilt with a plan to make it smart housing, affordable housing. Smart housing means and same thing with a smart city, which is what the Agenda 21 goal was, move everybody into smart cities, controlled and surveilled by technology. I'm not even saying I have a problem with that. That sounds like a Star Trek future. It really depends on how those tools are wielded, how the technology is wielded. So I'm not even getting into what their intentions were or anything like that, or how these fires in Maui were even set. Might have been a downed power line, because let's be fair, the authorities in Maui aren't even sure, or at least they're saying we don't know how it officially started. So they don't even know how it officially started. The overt thing that they're saying about it is invasive species in the grasslands created for lower humidity rates, and then the winds of a hurricane that was estimates were 200 to 800 miles south of it were removing humidity, and that the mountain range right behind Lahaina was creating this kind of oven effect where it was pushing heat back down, so that's how it could incinerate things, houses to white ash.
This is the naturalistic explanation, basically.
That's
okay.
this is
Okay.
climate change explanation.
Okay.
So I look at that and I'm like, I even said in my video, I don't have a problem with that, with this pressure system. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to pretend that I know that the pressure system created like an oven there. But there are some, even if you go with that logic, you have to ask some questions. Like, why is there a plastic play school thing right next to a house that was burnt to white ash, and this play school, this bright play school kids little jungle gym thing, not melted at all?
And all the green things were not touched. That was a weird one.
A lot of green things were not touched. I'm gonna. Hopefully, it's not too chaotic because.
Oh no! I'm following, and I'm sure the audience.
So I want to balance myself and show you that my thought process also goes to, okay, I'm gonna look at all forest fires that I can look at, knowing that a lot of them, 99% of them, weren't even arson. It was just natural forest fires. Are there anomalies? What do they look like? You can find anomalies in hurricanes, in tornadoes. House demolished, 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 demolished. Perfectly fine house. Demolished, 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 demolished. I've seen that in Pennsylvania, where a tornado just hopped over a certain house and destroyed everything in its path except that one house. Anomalies happen. So I'm not going to say that, the fact that there is green leaves on a tree right next to a house that was burnt to white ash can never happen. It can happen. I've seen it happen in other photos before. But it is kind of weird when these houses, Ed Dowd, he lives in Maui, he said most of these houses in Lahaina are made of completely wood. That's how you can burn it to white ash in its own footprint. Whereas there's other houses that don't seem burnt at all. That's one explanation. But I showed aerial footage to show, like, okay, look at all this greenery. There's a lot of greenery. And if a house is burnt to white ash, yet a tree right next to it is not burnt to white ash, the only explanation is, well, there's water inside the tree, not inside the wood, inside the houses. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. We're weaving through the nuances. And then there's awnings, plastic awnings, or at least fiber, whatever the material is of awnings that survived where the house is completely incinerated right next to it. Cars in the street where they're hubcaps. I don't know if they're aluminum, they could be plastic. This is the thing, I don't know. But there's people showing videos, how can this aluminum be melting down the road when aluminum melts at 1220 degrees Fahrenheit, where the asphalt it's sitting on melts at 350 degrees. These two don't add up. So then I'm like, okay, is that really aluminum? I don't know if it's really aluminum. So this is where the directed energy weapon people are saying, like, look, all these cars, they do not look like they were put through a fire. All the plastic is missing, all the glass is missing, and every one of them are burnt 100%. And I'm like, okay, I don't know, because I don't know what these materials are, and I haven't seen enough footage of other cars in fires to say whether this is completely out of the norm or not. So now we're getting into Agenda 21. That was the fires, me explaining the fires. It's hard to really know. But Agenda 21, which is now Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations to push people into smart cities for the betterment of humanity and to allow nature to bounce back. That's their explanation. What if people don't want to move off their farmland and go into a smart city? Some of the conspiracies say, well, we will create natural disasters to push them into that. So create a natural disaster and say it was beyond us, but now we have to take over this land and push you out of there. So the Kanaka, the families of indigenous Hawaiians that lived in Lahaina, they did not want to sell their land. There were the Oprahs, not Oprah specifically, but the Oprahs of the world that are coming in there and trying to buy 3-4 times market value with cash this land, and they were like, no, we don't want you. This is our land. Our ancestors are buried underneath this land. We don't want you taking this spot too. This is ours. So back in January, there was, I'm forgetting the name of the meeting, but it was like an AI conference of how to build Maui into a smart city, an entire smart island, meaning the whole thing is a device. You can throw your phone away if you want, but there's cameras everywhere, there's microphones everywhere. Everything that emits radiation is part of the Internet of Things gathering data.
Why were they interested in Hawaii? It's such a small place. Who care in the grand scheme of like the ecology? Hawaii barely makes a dent to anything. So
not true.
Not true?
It's the Indo-Pacific Command Center between the major superpowers of the world: United States, Russia, and China.
But that's not an ecological argument. It's more like a military argument, right?
Yes, but
No. I'm just clarifying for myself. I'm not saying it's illegitimate. I'm saying
so no. But you're right, and I'm glad you're bringing about this nuance. To me, this is where it really gets into like the military-industrial complex. It has its intelligence tentacles elsewhere and other tentacles into the military-industrial complex. So when you say that, like, why would this ecological thing on Maui not have to do with the military? To me, building Maui into a smart city, I'm not even 100% sure that the Maui fires and Agenda 21 are completely, the same thing. But these are the things that I want to bring up about it so other people can do their research about it. Hawaii is the largest Indo-Pacific, or it's the only real strongest Indo-Pacific command center between two major powers, the East and the West. The United States and China and Russia on the other side. It's a big ocean. That's a very strategic location. I heard people also saying Hawaii didn't stand a chance because of where it was located. If it wasn't going to be the United States in 1893 that took it, it was going to be Russia just shortly thereafter because where America and Russia and China are located. So it is very important strategically in that respect. I would even go so far as to saying on the Big Island where they're putting the 30-meter telescope and they're going to dig 2 stories into the ground and have a footprint that's like 2 football fields wide for something that's just going to look out into space. I would say it's not just going to look out into space. It has a military strategic application in this growing, like the brewing that we're hearing about this Russia-US tension, Russia and China-US tension.
I mean, I accept what you're saying, but that's not that crazy to me to believe that because it's not that big of a deal to put in a telescope. They do go out of their way, and a lot of effort is being put into, like the Keck Observatory, like that was very difficult to build. They definitely do things for not the military, but just purely for science, and it's not.
I 100% agree, and I have thought through that thought process about, is the 30-meter telescope a military weapon? No. It is a telescope. I've seen the designs. I've seen footage of it. I haven't gotten up close because they haven't built the thing yet. But so I've seen the designs. I've seen footage of what it's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to operate, shooting lasers out into the sky so it can make it through the aberrations of the atmosphere and get and all the mirrors kind of adjust in real time to the light coming through so it doesn't warp once it hits the atmosphere. The mirrors, they kind of shake it back into, a cohesive picture. Of course, this isn't 100% military. Does it have application with military? Does the military industrial complex have any use for it whatsoever? And you take a look at some of the funders from Japan, from China, from the United States, and from other countries, I think maybe Germany, to help put it in there. A lot of military funding is being pumped into it. So
this is like black on white. You can trace
You can trace it straight to the countries, and then you can see what funding is coming through. A lot of it is private. Some of it does come through.
What would it be looking for the military? Sorry, I'm lingering on this point. I just want to understand your process. What would the military be looking for in the sky? Or are you saying it can be reappropriated and like?
The space race is all about satellites up in the sky and what satellites can surmise. And we're going to start having mesh web and tons of satellites as we, enter into this new era.
Oh, there's already there's a danger that the space pollution will basically lock us in now at this point.
Right. So and to the final part of this, at least the 30-meter telescope part of it, is I'm not convinced that I know everything about it. But do I believe it has something to do with military industrial complex and the Indo-Pacific Command? I believe it absolutely could. And I would be surprised if it wasn't in some way connected whatsoever, even if it was just monitoring. I would be surprised if it wasn't connected in some way, but I wouldn't be surprised if it absolutely wasn't.
So you're just on the fence on that, you just want to mention to be fair.
Why Hawaii? It's a strategic spot for Indo-Pacific Command. it is a beautiful spot ecologically and everything like that. And why Hawaii when it comes to smart cities, which isn't the military side of it completely, but I would say it's not completely disconnected. Why Agenda 21? Because the whole point of the UN Agenda 21, now Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, is to make around the world smart cities. So China has 123, where there's cameras and audio set up to where the point would be. Robert Spalding, I think he was a retired Air Force colonel, he came out and wrote an entire book about this, where he was saying the point would be where you walk outside your door, you don't even have your phone in your hand, and you say Uber. Your voice is picked up, maybe your face, but it knows who you are based upon vocal recognition, facial recognition, and an Uber shows up. The Uber doesn't even have a driver inside of it. You hop in, you say where you want to go, and then you can also tell it, order from this place, order, whatever, blah, 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 and we'll pick it up on the way, and you go and pick it up. Sounds like a Star Trek future to me. All of this is fine and above board. So the reason why I feel like it's useful to bring up the fact that in January, just months ago, there was this AI conference about how to build Maui into a smart city. And then I show you the map. Where do they want to change it? Not everywhere on the map was exactly where the fires were, but Lahaina was definitely in it. And Lahaina was the one that was affected the most. There were 2 other spots, but it wasn't in major crowded areas, those other ones. The crowded city area was Lahaina. And that's right where the major, that was actually the capital of Hawaii. It was the Hawaiian Kingdom capital. And so there, the SMART agenda has been in place for quite some time. So now let's move up all the way to, we have water authority, and we also have, so who controls the water? Let's just start there. Who controls the water on Hawaii? It's always been, everybody owns the water. There's not enough of it to really go around, so everybody controls the fresh water there. So I think it was July 17th that an emergency proclamation was put into effect saying if there were a natural disaster or some kind of like war disaster or whatever it might be, if there were a disaster, we could say this is an emergency and we're going to take over the area for the time being for FEMA and Red Cross to take care of the people, and we can take over the area and all the water flows are put under the state authority, not the people, but the state. And so right beforehand, that was July 17th. August 8th was when the fire started. I think it was by August 9th or August 10th that it was going to be finalized, meaning it could not be eradicated even under emergency proclamation, who has control of the water. And so on August 8th, just 2 days before that, we have this disaster wherever it started. And from there, water was not released. So the water that could have helped people fight back some of the flames was not released. That's one thing that even authorities on Maui are questioning. They're like, why was this water not given? This could have helped people, in a sense, dampen the land and push back some of the flames. So that's a question that I have, and it is to me, it seems very convenient. I'm not convinced that this is conspiracy yet, but it is very convenient that like a month beforehand, emergency proclamations were put into place, and then the people of Lahaina, they were saying like, no. So we're going to adjust that back to the people. Not even an emergency proclamation can destroy that. And 2 days right before that happens is when this emergency proclamation that officially strips the water away from the people. There's also the downed power lines. We're still not getting enough information on, were there downed power lines or weren't there? How did the fire actually start? And we don't know. We just don't know. There are around, according to some sources, I don't know how to verify it because not many people are talking about it, but 2,000 kids that are still missing, haven't shown back up at school.
This is a fact. And they didn't account for them to
I can't call it a fact yet.
Okay.
It's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
That part, I can't call it a fact yet. But there are many, many missing kids from school. I heard mixed reviews
from
about
school,
Lahaina.
or they verified with the families as well?
a lot of the family members are missing as well.
Oh, okay.
So this is where like mixed information, I don't know, but I want to talk about these parts
Of course.
so other people can be like, oh, Ben, you're wrong. I actually found evidence or real proof that this is the official story.
I'm just clarifying for me so I understand.
I want to clarify it for your audience too, that, you know, these things that I'm, you know, mentioning, most people will be like, oh, this motherfucker believes some crazy shit. I'm mentioning, I don't fully believe the stuff that I'm saying are connected, but we got to talk about these nuances. So that was water. The downed power lines we don't know about yet. The missing children we're not 100% sure about. There's mixed signals saying that many kids were home, not at school where they might have been safer. They were home because of high winds, because of the hurricane that was 200 to 800 miles away. I don't know if that's normal, taking kids out of school because of high winds. I have no clue. But the high winds could have affected the fire and actually turned it into that oven. We don't know. So where was the final piece on this? We went through Agenda 21 and the legislation that changed right beforehand. Okay, so were people barricaded inside there? There's testimony of this guy Fish, who lived in Lahaina for 40 years, saying, as I was walking out, there was somebody barricading, blocking the cars, not letting them out of Lahaina. And
who is that person? Like, what is that? Was there someone in the car, like, that you approach and like, hey, or what does barricading mean in that sense? Because what I saw in the video is just vehicles that wouldn't move.
So,
right?
Okay, so there's a video in one of the videos that I showed, Fish. He's talking about it afterwards, and he's talking to a guy that just happened to see him, called him up, and he's giving his story. And Fish was saying, I was what I believe to be the last person out of Lahaina, because as I'm walking out, I see this line of cars, and then I see what's blocking it in, and it's the line of cars. It's not a person blocking, but there is a cop saying, and Fish claims he went up to the cop and said, why are you blocking these people? And he said, I'm under orders. And he said, but there's a fire and it's right down on whatever street it was. We need to get all these people out. And the officer said, I'm under orders.
Yeah, I saw that. That's crazy.
And so as Fish kept walking and he started hearing explosions, and then I switched to footage of people in their cars in Lahaina trying to hightail it out of there, but they're stuck behind traffic. And they're panting, they're freaked out, there's cars on either side of them, there's bodies in the street. You can hear them call, dude, that's a body, that's a body. And they're staying in their cars. They don't know whether they're safer staying in the car or getting out and running. And there's people that had to jump into the water. So all of this could, you know, and I'm not even saying that a cop stopping traffic is beyond comprehension. It is beyond my comprehension, but like, I'm willing to be wrong on this. I'm willing to be wrong.
No, with you. Where's the human element here?
Yeah, so where's the cop going like, yeah, the orders are telling me to stop these cars, but there's a fire right there. It makes me wonder if Fish is being authentic, right? Because it sounds so anti-human in a way. It makes me feel like whether he was being real or not, or whether his mind's working correctly.
No, people under order do a lot of crazy shit. I mean, not to Germany,
I'm talking about
right?
Fish, not even the cop. I'm
I know,
if
I understand.
Fish
recounting
the story is like, wait a minute, is this
it sounds
even possible
insane
that a cop would keep people barricaded inside?
No, I'm saying that I'm with you that it does make Fish sound a little crazy, but on the other hand, we do know that people just fulfilling orders do pretty gnarly shit. Again, Nazi Germany, or what's the famous experiment in? Was it like, it was a really famous experiment where they with the prisoners and the, you know what I'm talking about?
With the kids in school?
No. It's when they divided the students into two groups. Half became prisoners, half became guards, and then immediately the guards just became like super abusive.
Yeah.
Right? So just the power dynamic thing.
Totally. And so there's other testimony of people. There was this big conference not long after. There was this big conference not long after the fires where there were people from Hawaii, like indigenous Hawaiians, saying there were barricades. So these are other people saying there were people barricaded. They weren't able to get their cars out, and there were more deaths because of these car barricades. So I have that footage. I haven't made a video out of that yet. But they've already set up a FEMA camp with like small, affordable units that people can live in for now. The latest conspiracy is, why are there hoses, like entry and exit hoses going into these? What, is it water for the sinks? Maybe that would be the first thing I would think, and they're like, "Oh, these are gas chambers," and I'm like, "Okay, that's the conspiracy gone way too far."
Yeah.
That's the conspiracy gone way too far, because all we're talking about is a metal hose going into a white box inside of a FEMA camp. Is FEMA allowed to do what they were ordered to do, or is everything a conspiracy? You know, so I think FEMA has the right to do what they're ordered to do. And when people were saying, we're going to send billions of dollars to Ukraine, but we're only going to give people in Lahaina $700, that's the FEMA limit. They're limited. So yeah, maybe argue that FEMA should raise the limit in an emergency protocol to be able to give more than $700. But people that are coming out and saying that kind of a conspiracy, and not even conspiracy, just like corruption. Why are we sending so much money to Ukraine and sending so little to people in Hawaii? You can't compare them apples to apples. They're apples and oranges. They're two completely different scenarios. And the amounts of money that can be spent or sent over to Ukraine is different than what FEMA can give each individual family. So that to me is kind of like all this data is bouncing around in my head as I'm looking at all these videos. And the one thing I'm making sure that I don't do is hear from people on TikTok that live in Maui saying, don't believe the news, because you know what? They could be misinformed, because maybe they live on the other side of Maui and they have no frickin' clue what's going on. There's people probably inside Lahaina that still have no clue how it started. Right? They got out in time, they're safe, but they have no idea how it started. It's in the mess, the fog of an emergency. They have no clue. So that is wrapping the bow on Maui. To me, I believe we should ask the question, like, it is very interesting timing that a bunch of infrastructure was burnt to nothing. I would be very interested to see if this is where that's where they said they wanted to build smart housing. Are they going to start building smart housing in that area? Because if so, then it was very convenient. You can call it a coincidence theory.
But I have a counterfactual about this for you personally.
Sure.
Would there be a time, any time before this, if this would happen and you wouldn't be suspicious because of the timing? Or would you be suspicious of that since the moment that the Agenda 21 was created? Because then it kind of eliminates because if you would just be suspicious because it exists, you know what I mean, then it kind of eliminates the timing thing.
Yeah, well, you know, like, here's my biggest argument to myself is, for one, Agenda 2030 is everywhere. So then if any natural disaster happens and you blame it on Agenda 21, you can be like, come on, dude, like, that's like saying that a fire happened on planet Earth and there's a planet Earth agenda, right? And a fire happened on planet Earth, so it must be part of that agenda. Like, you can't lump them together all the time. So here's where I stay safe on that. I'm suspicious of everything. I won't lose that. I'm suspicious because that's my open-mindedness. I'll stay skeptical about almost everything. I don't force myself to, but if I have a question, like these Libyan floods that just happened, of course there was Agenda 2030 that was happening right there in Derna, in this Islamic, run part of Libya, and these floods that just happened wiped out a bunch of infrastructure. Could that be a natural disaster? Absolutely. Is it? I'm probably 85 to 90% sure that was a natural disaster right there. And it also happens to be that there was Agenda 2030 right there. Will they build that up as smart housing? I guarantee it. Why wouldn't they use that opportunity? So a detractor to me would be like, Ben, what you're pointing out is not premeditated fires, which I never claimed. I never claimed they were premeditated fires. I'm just saying I will use Maui as another reason to talk about Agenda 21.
But they did ride the back of a natural disaster, let's say.
Opportunistic. Yeah. So there is crisis capitalism or opportunism after a crisis.
That makes perfect sense to me.
That makes total sense to me as well. So in Maui, like, could this possibly be exactly as it is on the books and they'll build it up as a smart city and Agenda 2030 had nothing to do with the fire itself? I'm perfectly fine with that. That's not going to stop me from talking about Agenda 2030. And so I utilize this opportunity. This is where I feel like there are so many conspiracy theorists that are trying to prove conspiracy that I get mixed in with them. I'm not trying to prove conspiracy, but I will use an opportunity like this to remind people, if you haven't forgotten, Agenda 2030 is a thing, and there does happen to be around 34 of 37 of the BLM riots were within a quarter mile or a half mile of the central bank, where all the infrastructure was damaged. Not all of it, but a lot of it was damaged. could you say like, oh, well, that's interesting because that's Catherine Austin Fitts believes, and she worked under George H.W. Bush. Catherine Austin Fitts believes that it was damaged so the banks could buy up the infrastructure, pennies on the dollar, to build the smart grid without becoming bankrupt. So, okay, I don't even know if I fully believe it, but it's in the back of my mind as, is that out of the question?
But there's just certain things. So let me just make a slight differentiation between, let's say, the case in Maui and the case with BLM, and let's lump it with one more. Let's say the Wuhan lab. Okay,
Yeah.
so I feel like BLM and Wuhan lab is actually easier to look at and decide whether there was some kind of a fuckery going on, just because there's certain things on the surface that just literally makes zero sense. Like it was doing mandates, right? And then go and protest, that's fine. That makes no sense, right? It's like that's a decision that doesn't make any virology sense. It's like that's not it. There's, I don't know what the motives might be, but there's definitely some kind of a motive to allow that to happen, because it doesn't make any logical sense. Wuhan lab, it takes maybe a little bit longer to unpack, but I think that seeing from the beginning that most likely it was from the lab was not that outlandish or crazy, and it was relatively easy to see. First hint is that the lab literally has the name of the disease, and it's like, it's like kind of that. So these are a little different for me than what happened in Maui. But what you said at the end there about what happened in Hawaii is that is just kind of right on the back of a natural disaster. Yeah, I'm totally fine with it. That's like that makes perfect sense to me, because in their minds, I can even see the complete utilitarian argument of like, well, okay, I mean, yeah, it's horrible, but we shouldn't wait. Now we have an opportunity to do the thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I don't even disagree with that. And in a sense, I'm not convinced by any of it, nor am I convinced by the conventional story.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced by any of it.
I know you're not. I'm just speaking out loud.
No, I know. Yeah. And in a sense, I reiterate it more for the audience to really show like the way that I bring these things up. It's important to bring it up in the right way to show that the process of how I move through information is more important than a conclusion that I might land on.
I know. It's a perfect example. That is beautiful.
So the thing with Maui, like afterwards, just like you would also expect, is there are a lot of people trying to make cash offers on that land to buy it up. And so, again, does that mean that this was, not a natural disaster? No. But it does mean that there's enough happening there that I want to highlight the story, and I will always mention Agenda 21 because it seems to always go back to that.
But there's also a more important component there that I think that we should emphasize, which is if that is the case, we should definitely start putting a different emphasis. Like, this is actually something that needs to be remedied as well, this kind of attitude. Because yes, you can act quickly to do the thing that you believe is the right thing, even though this horrible thing that just happened, but an entity that does not at the same time offer, I guess I would call it physical compassion, which is like, hey, bring some of that budget that you're about to put into your big plan, which we both know is numbers that most people can't even comprehend.
Right.
Cut a slice of that. Help the people first. Because that should be part of the thing. If you actually care about the environment, people are part of the environment, right? So help them first, then execute your big plan. So that to me is a thing that actually needs to be looked at. Even more, even if they're just riding on the back of the case, you should care about the people who are actually going through the suffering right now.
Totally. And I mean, you can go way more into detail about specifically this last event on Maui and how the Kanaka are being treated right now. Literally how they're being treated as well. So not just the conditions they're living in, but the way they're being treated by the authorities is the same way they've been being treated by the authorities. And I'm just regurgitating the words of themselves. So moving on, just to kind of tie this back up into why I focus on this. The BLM riots, I don't even know if that's exactly why, was to destroy the infrastructure so you could build up the smart grid in its place and move people out of those ma and pa shops. I don't even know. It is interesting that 34 out of the 37 riots happened within a quarter mile or a half mile of the central banks. That's from Catherine Austin Fitts, who did maps of all these things. So the same thing with Ukraine. And a big, investment firm, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, that are pushing for ESGs, CBDCs, social credit scoring, and very much so involved in World Economic Forum and the rebuild of Ukraine. BlackRock said, we will rebuild Ukraine. I will just put it out there for people, watch, it will be built as a smart city. So it doesn't matter, again, I'm not calling into question the origins of the Ukraine war. I'm not even calling into question why should BlackRock say we will help you rebuild. I'm just saying it's going to become a smart country. It's going to be, I believe, the prototype for Europe to be the rebuilt smart country. And there are people who take my logic and go back to World War II and say a lot of the reason why they bombed indiscriminately some interesting places was actually to destroy some of the historical and some of the buildings that had like their finances run out of there, to demolish infrastructure. Nowadays, it's this idea of building back a smart grid in its place.
But just to be fair, if their plan is to do this stuff and they're very open about it, obviously the first places you're going to pick are the places that went through some kind of disasters to do that.
Totally.
So it's just, that's a natural thing to do. So yes, they will build it because they would first use the places that were destroyed in this thing. I guess the one point where, this is one of those things where I feel like our starting points are slightly different, is that I find it much harder to believe, and this is by no means to say that it's less legitimate to go about it your route. I'm listening very carefully. So the one thing I'm having a harder time with, think about the decision makers who have to make, like, especially when you're saying people go with that kind of idea all the way to World War II. First of all, the level of planning around it, but also imagine that somebody has to be okay with this level of destruction riding on their karma. Even if you're not a religious person, I want to rebuild this, therefore I will allow this amount of people to be murdered, killed, and destroyed. I feel that there's something about the human soul that would stop that on its tracks for most people. And the belief that that's not the case is just believing that more people are real psychopaths than we know there are in society. If there's 1%, then that means that in any organization you're going to have a percentage of that. But to believe that it's like 20% of the population, to me, that's a lot to take on board. Like, yes, you can backtrack and logically explain everything in terms of something else, but it's just that one component, which is like, imagine what it means to say yes to a plan that will kill thousands of people in some cases, and then just in order to rebuild the thing. It does make sense to me that if it's already happening, now you're like, okay, let me implement my plans on top of it. Sure. Okay, it's easier to swallow for me, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think this is really drilling down into the nuance that I think people miss.
And by the way, I understand you're not making that point. I'm just speaking to the people that are making points like this, which is like they think that somebody premeditatively planned these destructions, let's say. I'm just saying to them, that one thing is harder for me to swallow. The fact that people would, go through such lengths to try and hurt other people. But again, like I said, I'm saying it more to the people who adopt this kind of attitude when somebody planned it versus
the other one, all the other side.
Right. Versus somebody was riding an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think most of it is riding an opportunity. I personally do. The one example you gave of like somebody going and carpet bombing a city, knowing what the agenda is, I don't think it's a fair hypothetical, only because those who are going out and like dropping bombs, they don't know what the real agenda is. I would argue they're told it's for God and country, and I'm paraphrasing.
No, but I even mean the people who make the decisions. Like even the people who told you to, who said let's go and bomb this place. Even these people, I feel like they would be doing it because of they believe it's for the country, or they believe it, this is the right thing.
For the most part, and I try not to crawl into the heads of people that I don't know, like to assume that they're better or worse, so I don't really climb into their heads and believe anything specific. But the banality of evil, I mean, if you think about it, you could say that by passing a legislation in a high tower in New York, you could technically bring about the end of 50,000, or let's say 100,000 jobs, an entire industry or something like that. and not knowing how that's going to actually, because you have a story of why this is good, but you may not know the full impact of how that's going to cause some people to commit suicide, some people drink because they lost their job, they don't know what else to do with their lives. This is the banality of evil that doesn't require some Illuminati mustache twisty villain. Like I keep saying, a lot of people when they say conspiracy, they talk about the deep state, they talk about a cabal, they're mentioning certain people that they believe are in on some conspiracy. I don't really go that far. I kind of like the George Carlin idea of there doesn't need to be a formal conspiracy when interests converge. So there's just this economic incentive, and if you want to make more money, here are your loopholes. These are the things that seem to be more, the low-hanging fruit of that, and you're going to see that as a, in a sense, an effect of the market. So it's the banality of evil. So whereas I do not believe there are people going out and bombing or saying, hey, we want Maui, go start a fire over there. We want Ukraine, so let's stage an invasion, or let's get people who aren't really angry about anything to riot around central banks so we can buy up the infrastructure on pennies on the dollar. I don't believe it's so simple. I do believe people are hooked into these narratives that are a part of a kind of a struggle, let's say a back and forth thing. Actually, this is a question I didn't even answer from before. I do believe that me having questioned climate change from the start, but also believed it from the start, I noticed that part of me was being tugged into this right-wing fossil fuel narrative, and I'm totally fine. Like I drank the Kool-Aid, I know that. But I did so because I didn't fully believe that everything under the sun was climate change. I didn't believe that the number one thing that we needed to do was focus on carbon emissions, and that's all of a sudden going to make the climate or make the environment that much better. I could see, I could smell the bullshit of both sides, but in doing so, I know that I'm, just coming into the information. So I'm going to get sucked down rabbit holes that, maybe are not true. But when it comes to really taking a look at something that I do believe is a bigger agenda, the UN Sustainable Development Goals to push everybody into these cities, there's a map that I can show you that shows where people will be concentrated and where nature will be kind of left to nature, and only people with authorized access can go into those territories. I believe that there is a certain point, and I think the reason why I have to champion a point, I agree with you, like on Maui, it makes more sense to say that it's people capitalizing off of a disaster after the case, not starting the fire and then capitalizing off of it. That is more likely than any other theory. There are more nuances to it, but I definitely believe that. But I feel also people, the reason why I stand up and I will talk about any conspiracy that I feel has some merit and at least needs to be brought out into the open air so it can be swatted down by intelligent people, I think that's more important than just believing whatever comes from legacy media, hook, line, and sinker, and anything that deviates, don't worry about those people. You just call them conspiracy theorists, and other people will want to back away because of association. It's like, you don't want to, like, the kid that's getting bullied on the schoolyard, you don't want to associate yourself with that bully, especially not in the moment. For me, I don't have that worry. So I'll stand up and I'll say something right away. And I'll also talk about my thought process. I don't know exactly what's happening here, but to see this map of Agenda 21, most people that'll call me a conspiracy theorist, they don't even know what Agenda 21 is. They've never seen the map. They haven't spent 11 years studying this, and they'll just label me something. But I'm like, do you know what Agenda 21 is? Have you seen this map? Do you think that this map would just come out of nowhere? Do you think it's just pot smokers in their basement photoshopping maps and creating conspiracies? I've thought of that. I do believe that there is a conspiracy wing to the left and the right wing. I think there's a conspiracy wing. How do you radicalize people on our side? Make the other, like, I think that's what the Q conspiracy was. Bunch of bullshit, but just enough kind of really cool, clever weaving to get people to think that Trump is playing 4D chess.
No, but that's also a form of conspiracy, to think that people are doing it for some more grand, like a grand plan, versus they're just being idiots in their basement who wants to be heard, and that's their way of being heard.
Another way of saying it is coincidence theorist.
Well,
if you believe everything is a coincidence and nothing can be a conspiracy theorist, you're making a larger leap than some conspiracy theorists are making. Because conspiracy theorists research, and then they're researching from a biased position.
Wait, no, so maybe I misunderstood the argument. Were you not saying that some of the conspiracy theorists' army is being mobilized to do a thing? Is that not what you were saying? Like they are to achieve a goal of misinformation or to be make people against other people or something like this?
Yeah. So
versus like, I'm not saying everything is a coincidence. I'm saying that it makes more sense to me that the kid is just somebody sitting in the basement, did a lot of research, they really believe this stuff, and they put it out there because they really believe in this stuff. Versus somebody's trying to, again, cajole them to do a thing, like to be a part of a larger thing, versus them maybe utilizing the fact that there are other conspiracy theorists saying a thing, and then again, riding on top of that situation to do whatever you need to do.
Yeah,
nobody called them and said, do A, B, and C, right?
I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I do believe that there are well-meaning people that will embellish a story and take many leaps because they really believe it, and then they'll push it out there, and that'll cause people to become a conspiracy theorist on a certain topic that maybe is above level. So I do think that can happen, not because one person told the other person, go spread this misinformation. However, if you, I'm forgetting her name, Brittany Kaiser, she was really big in trying to get people's data back under their own ownership. And she started investigating data aggregators, these companies that their job is just aggregating a bunch of data. She's the one who blew the whistle, saying there are misinformation and disinformation wings of these data aggregation companies that have misinformation and disinformation as a service. So I guess it would just be one of them. It would be the disinformation. Misinformation, I guess they say, is when you do it by mistake. Disinformation is with an agenda.
Targeting, yeah.
There are disinformation wings of data aggregators, meaning they hold that as a service. You want us to spread some disinformation? We can do that. Here's another thing just to keep in mind. Provable, unless somebody will show me that all the different sources that I found are unfactual, that William Casey, the CIA director, in 1981 or 1982, under Reagan, said, "We will know our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American believes is false." When everything the American public believes is false. Direct quote from him. So maybe that's a conspiracy. Maybe that's fake news. Maybe he didn't really say that. What was the
context? Just out of curiosity, do you know?
I've tried to find the context and I couldn't find it. But I know him and his predecessor. We're talking, I've actually seen video of his predecessor in the 70s saying how we took over, the CIA took over, or have our tendrils in every wing of media. And for that, we've had to share misinformation with other countries. And it would, we share the disinformation with other countries. We confuse them. So in a sense, we can kind of take over some kind of economic, possibility that this country has, but they won't let us if we tell them the real news. So we'll spread some misinformation, we'll radicalize them, and then we'll come in and we'll do the thing. We'll take the oil, we'll get the resources, whatever it might be.
Interesting.
The predecessor to William Casey in the CIA, the director of the CIA during the 70s, said this in an interview, in a deposition. Now, does that exist? He at least says it exists, unless you call him ill-informed as the CIA director or you call that a deep fake. That exists in other countries. Could that be turned around on the American people? I believe, and I'm not the only one who believes this, many people believe that the CIA said they're not allowed to perform their operations on our own people, but with the internet, it's a lot easier to do it under a different heading, under a different title. So it goes under a different category. It's technically an international thing when really it's directed at the people of the US. So again, I take this information and I say, is it beyond the realm of possibility to believe that a military-grade psyop is being played on the people of the United States for, let's say, an express purpose of pushing people to the voting ballots, or keeping introverts who are prone to conspiracies away from the voting ballots. To make young people get more into politics because we need to take care of all this crap. Look at what the right is doing. Look at what the left is doing. I've heard all these. I don't know exactly what it is, but are these intelligence agencies above utilizing what they do without a blink of an eye in other countries on their own country? I think we're in those times right now. And I would be down with hearing other logic. I'm actually begging, I'm hungry for other logic. But when I bring this conversation up, usually the opposition is not a nuanced conversation like we're having. The opposition is like somebody says that, like you must be a flat earther too, or something like that. They'll do the logical fallacy. What is that? Ad absurdum or ad infinitum? Not sure. Where you take somebody's argument, you blow it up to astronomical proportions, and then you use that blown up proportioned argument as the thing to argue, not the original argument.
Ad absurdum, yeah.
Okay. So, that one, or you attack the character of the person, say that like, ad hominem, where you attack the person, not the argument. That's usually what I get when I simply want to ask the question. So people will make the assumption that I'm convinced about the topic that I'm bringing up, when really I think we need to be talking about it with more level-headed people.
I think it's just a matter of also how much bandwidth people have to deal with each one of these things. Again, it's like, people want to interact with these things superficially sometimes, but they don't feel like going into the details because that's too much work and they have other things to do.
Totally.
Yeah. So, but I'm in full agreement with you that there's no, I don't doubt for a second that there are, especially with the CIA, you have campaigns to control the data, to control the public's opinion about things. That I don't doubt for a second. Mm-hmm. If you are that kind of an entity, it's the logical thing to do. It's like, it's the ultimate warfare. If you can control what people can think to a large degree, which Bernays proved functionally, right? And when was this?
World War II.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it a little before?
He was a cousin of Freud. Was it?
Yeah.
It might have been right before.
But it doesn't matter. But he proved like functionally you can do that, right? So it would make sense that, an entity like the CIA would take advantage of something like this. That I don't doubt. Mm. I guess it's just that there's not really a big point that I'm landing on here. It's just that I feel that maybe more towards like what Charles is saying, which is that the more we focus on these kind of things, the more they become the main thing. And I'm still, my jury is still out whether that it influences the world physically. I'm open to it because I'm now exposed to some things that, that are beyond what we seem to see here. I do think it has some basis in our understanding of the physical world, but I'm still out there. But I do know that there's a much better chance to live in a much better world if we don't focus so much attention on these kind of things. It's kind of like the point I shared when somebody actually shared the Hawaii thing with me. They're like, we need to talk about this. And I shared, that famous clip when Morgan Freeman was talking to, forget his name, I think from 60 Minutes, when they were talking about racism. It's like a really famous clip that went viral for a long time. And he basically told him, like, he asked him what he thinks about Black History Month. And he said, oh, well, like, I don't want it. I don't understand what Black History Month is. Black History Month is American history, he said. Mm-hmm. And then he said, okay, well, when is White History Month? I was like, well, I'm Jewish. Whoever that, I forget his name. He said, oh, okay. When is Jewish History Month? I was like, there isn't one. Oh, okay. Do you want one? No. Good. I don't either. And then he said, okay, so how do we get rid of racism? He's like, stop talking about it. Which is, now, this is not something I'm telling you.
Right.
I'm saying, for me, the attitude that I take towards life is more like, yes, you should definitely be aware of what's going on and try and remedy it to the best you can. But I feel, and again, this is not a convoluted way of saying this is what you're doing. I'm just talking about the public.
Yeah.
I do see that a lot, that people just immerse themselves in this and that's all they care about. And of course, that's what's going to fill their lives. And then they get more nervous and then they I guess in that sense, the difference between what you're doing and what most people I see are doing is that you don't get emotionally attached to it. You actually talking about the things for what you believe they are, and you allow yourself to talk about it in that way, which gives the example to people. But what I see across the board is that people just literally perpetuate this. And then, of course, they get, they're very anxious all the time, and like everything is out to get them and all that stuff. So it's like, I feel like the more we focus on the things that are more constructive in our immediate environment and actually like try and interact with that, because we actually have influence on that, I feel like we're going to move into a much better space. Because guess what? For most people, like you're talking about all these things. Okay, now what? Unless you're going to go and do something about it, like a lot of the stuff that people even come up with that sounds a little crazy, I'm like, I'm not fully not on board. Like, I'm like, yeah, maybe. Yeah. But like, there's literally nothing I can do. And I don't feel like it's a defeatist attitude. It's just like, literally, like, I can choose to maybe devote my life to it. There's a lot of things that actually even animate me personally. Like, I don't know where you land on this, so I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble with you on this, but like Greta pisses the shit out of me, okay? I'm like, dude, she's so clearly a show, right? But then I caught myself like being kind of like in this thing. I never talk about it publicly. I don't really care that much. But inside, I'm like, I can see the charade, and it infuriates me that anybody's buying this, right? Not that she doesn't believe what she's saying. It's clear to me that she's just a little kid who was part of a larger function. They're like, oh, great, let's do that. Right. And it's funny enough, it's something that actually, from all the people in the world, Andrew Schulz made a point that I was like, holy shit, Andrew Schulz making a good point. He's hilarious, but I never expect him to make a point that also makes sense. He said, it's like, he was thinking about this, and it's like, who the fuck is this kid? And then he's like, why are they having a kid yell at us? I was like, oh, I get it. Because if you speak back, now you're the asshole. So now you're like, oh, you have to listen, because it's like the kid who's telling you the thing. I was like, oh yeah, that actually makes perfect sense. Yeah. See, like that kind of thing. But then my point I'm making is that I saw that when I recognize these things in myself, I'm like, this takes way too much energy from my brain when I see that, and it doesn't actually serve. What am I going to do with that? It's like, there's nothing I can do with that. Yeah. So I guess for you it's different because you are doing something with that. You're taking that, you're putting it into an envelope that people can open and enjoy and also learn something from, so it's relevant. Yeah. But but this is just like, for most people, I feel like they just ramble about it, and there's nothing that is actually at the end of that.
I agree. I want to say that I'm a niche. I'm not conventional cookie cutter. I'm not for the masses. And I agree with everything that you're saying there. I'll start real quick on Greta. I think another reason why she's used is it's an archetype. A child is the reflection of the generations that are coming. They're going to inherit the world that we leave behind to them. So it's an archetypal reflection that your future generations are talking to you right now, and they're pissed off that you didn't take it seriously enough. And in many ways, I can see why that is a smart move. It's just, like, when you can see the formula behind the movie, when you're like, oh, that's the setup, now I know exactly how they're going to pay it off, it gets a little cheesy. I never got like super upset about her, and in many ways.
No, just the fact that it's clear to me that she doesn't feel that.
The formula is clear.
She doesn't care.
The formula is clear. And another thing, when you were mentioning what are we supposed to do about this? It's not really actionable. And when you're talking about the conspiracies and you're bringing people's minds there, that may be less productive than doing the Bucky Fuller thing and like render that obsolete by just building the new system. I fully agree with that. So here's again how I will like actually position myself to say, the reason why I'm talking about this stuff now, I stopped talking about conspiracy back in 2011 when I made the film Ungrip. Then it was just psychedelics for me until 2020 came along. And then I was like, I understand a little bit more of my purpose now. Now I understand why way back then I started researching this stuff. Because there are people waking up to a world very rapidly right now, and they're in it. Back in 2012, it wasn't obvious that the world was, transforming like it is right now. So come 2020, I realized the way that I had to spiritually evolve and become mature, while not throwing away these topics that many of them might be 95% of conspiracy I threw away. There's 5% that would not go away, and now they're strengthened. I think that's valuable, but I also understand most people don't have the bandwidth for that. So my work is not actually for the general masses. I've said in many of my episodes, if you go way back, that I feel my job actually more is to rehab those that are dead set on conspiracy being the only way to explain the world. I'm rehabbing them. Not just rehabbing them away from it, but showing that some of what you believed has merit. Now, clear out the 95% of the junk and let that build into some kind of a mission statement. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? Because conspiracy theorists, like, I've at least sat inside the mentality of a conspiracy theorist, and I understand that, like, much of it is apophenia, where you're connecting dots that they could be connected in 50 other ways. Why are you connecting it in this way? I understand that. There's also leaps, and we love to, it's the raphe nuclei and the, not in the amygdala, but I think in the corpus callosum that lights up on psychedelics because even your hands are novel to you. So novelty makes it light up. Conspiracy does the same thing. So for me, the reason why I speak about these topics is to show a better way for those who are already stuck inside the mentality of being a conspiracy theorist. And their response to the world is, fuck you, you idiot, fuck you, you imbecile, you guys are ignorant, fuck all of you. And they get so frustrated. And I'm like, that response is the problem, not the belief. You know how many people believe that, you know, because their parents and the way that they were raised, that there's a white bearded man somewhere up there? I'm not saying God, I'm saying a white bearded man, you know, up in the sky that sees everything. Right? They believe that, but we're fine with that. A huge percentage of the population believes in God. Another whole percentage of the population believes there is no God. You can say there's a huge fight between them, but we accept it, right? We get along. We walk by somebody, we see, like, you know, that person probably believes in God. Oh, that's an atheist. We don't get super triggered by it, but all of a sudden, if you believe something about 9/11, or all of a sudden, if you believe something about the great financial collapse of 2008 and the way that it kind of moved us towards BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street buying up affordable housing and something like that, all of a sudden, you're an enemy. All of a sudden, you are tantamount to being a terrorist. Why?
Do you feel it's more relevant to the time?
Well, it's relevant to the time, but what it's doing is all nations are held together by story. If you start attacking the story, you're worse than the left or the right. Right? If you don't believe this, that's why a conspiracy theory is different than somebody on the left or on the right, because they're tearing apart the narrative that these two sides hold so sacred. They hold it so holy that they're like, you know, there's us, then there's them. And even inside conspiracy, same thing happens. Like, you know, oh man, I loved conspiracy when it was about 9/11 or it was about this, that, and the other. Then the flat earthers and the Q-tards started coming on the scene, right? There's always these people where it's just like, man, this is cool. Being edgy is cool. Thinking outside the box is cool, but not them. They're too far outside the box. And to me, you can sweep away all that nuance and say, we all have different worldviews. Some are more dangerous than the others, because when they're more dangerous and they're more volatile and people are pushing back, it's because you are attacking a worldview. Remember when we were talking about in the beginning, like the ego, the identity, like you attack something about me and I defend it like it's my own, even though somebody else told me that 2 days ago? That to me is a cultural in culture. It's reflected upon these entire movements against anti-vaxxers. When anti-vaxxers started as people, I will never take a vaccine, they're all poison. And there are some people who are like, I don't believe any of that. I just want to research, and I'm tired of getting badgered into making a decision based upon a vaccine that went through a warp speed process, mind you, started under Trump. And now if I don't take that vaccine, I'm a Republican. Like, this is where it gets so systemic, this fear and this skepticism, that I actually started wanting to rehab people from conspiracy. That's actually the reason why I get into it. So the way to do that is not to tell them, okay, you drank the Kool-Aid and none of that shit is real. None of it is real. No, some of it has merit. In the same way that pro-life, pro-choice, okay, somebody who's pro-choice is not anti-life. Somebody who's pro-life is not anti-choice, right? We can't make it so bereft of nuance that we're not seeing that there's a human on the other side of this. I've met plenty of flat earthers. I don't believe the earth is flat. Can I get along with them? Fine. Are they angry at other people in the way most conspiracy theorists are? Yeah, they have some emotional immaturity that they need to deal with. But we've gone so deeply into the weeds. We are given so much content and micro content, TikTok, Instagram, short form content, that we're building worldviews based upon this really granular information. I think it's actually a good thing, because what's happening is worldviews are changing more rapidly. And then here's where the not so good part of that comes in. When you start radically changing things, like in politics, Vivek Ramaswamy saying, let's get rid of 75% of everyone in Congress, year one. Get rid of the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, year one. Maybe he didn't say NSA.
No, he only said FBI. I think.
FBI.
And the educational system. That's what I heard so far.
No, you're right. On
Patrick
Bet David, he said the FBI, the educational, the Board of Education. I thought maybe he
I never
said
heard him
one
say
other.
CIA. Yeah.
He said, no, you're right. It was either CIA or it was FBI. One would
Definitely
not be.
Definitely FBI.
Okay, then it was the CIA. He said I would make some reform to it, but I wouldn't eradicate it. To me, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because if you're coming from an emotional place where that seems awesome to you, and you're not questioning why that seems awesome to you, it's because you're probably putting yourself in a camp that believes itself to be the victim of whatever's going on. You believe yourself to be the victim, so massively draining the swamp, as Trump called it, would be awesome, right? Because we're getting rid of the problem. What's going to be put in its place? Oh, we don't need to ask those questions yet. That's the only thing that I feel like people who are hard up about Vivek Ramaswamy are not questioning him on is like, what's going to happen when you drain that swamp?
Well, wait, no. But he does mention this in the same idea. He says that he's basically going to reallocate the 25% who are doing the field work, and he's going to embed them into other entities like the National Guard and other places because they're capable people. And he's going to get rid of the, whatever he said, like 20,000 people or some crazy number like that that work in the same building. They're just bureaucrats who don't really do anything that, and it's obviously they will still have positions in the government.
Right.
So that's the idea. Now, if you're talking about the, what he thinks the actual outcome would be, well, obviously he believes that,
it'd be a net positive.
Net positive. I can speak about the educational thing, which I actually listened very carefully about his exact plan. And I think it's phenomenal. So the fact that he wants
I don't mind the Board of Education thing.
Yeah.
I don't mind the other ones.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, and please finish your thought, because my thought process is most people you ask this question to, they have no clue. I'm talking about the people, not even Vivek. Maybe he has a plan and like he knows the nuanced details of how this will most likely impact the world.
Well, I guess the reason it made me say something is because you outlined a picture that I'm very excited about him as a candidate.
Yeah.
It does not mean I will vote for him yet. It does mean that I'm just, it does, like many say, it does feel like a breath of fresh air.
Totally.
And of course you can always play the game of like, oh, this is all a charade. I'm like, okay, I don't know how to have the conversation with that, because on the surface of it looks like he's very genuine.
Yeah.
Even if I don't agree with him on a lot of things. But I can say that I don't fall in the category of, oh, I'm just excited because I feel victimized. I'm excited because I listened to the plan. I'm like, because when he said it at first, I was like, that just sounded crazy to me. But then when he explained it, I didn't know that 75% is just people who are pushing papers and don't really do anything. I didn't know that you can actually take the thing from the educational system. It never occurred to me that you can just reallocate it and put it towards a fund that will go towards higher education, which we all know is where the real difference happens. It never happens in the lower education anyways.
Yeah.
So like I never thought about these things. And the fact that there's somebody who's running for president voices these things publicly, that tells me, above everything, it's not about the political system. It tells me that we're entering a new stage of human development, and what excites me is that it potentially places America back as the trendsetter of how we should do things in a positive way, like that kind of influence. Many people will look at that and say, it sounds like you drank the Kool-Aid there. I'm like, I don't know. When I was a kid, growing up looking at America only in movies, that's what I saw. When I came here, it became very quickly obviously to me that that was just an idea.
Yeah.
And but that I'm hearing that idea now for the first time in my life, expressed in a way that I'm like, oh, spoken by a guy who created multi-billion-dollar companies, who worked on things that actually mattered to better humanity, like medications for people that otherwise would die. Like a lot of the dots here, and again, I disagree with him about a lot. It's just that how he is about it, how he thinks about it. That's the thing that excites me.
Yeah.
And I do believe that we will see a very different future, whether him or Kennedy will be elected, because at least I see an openness to hear the other side.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that we're really talking about here.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, the only reason I brought up Vivek there was to mention a concept that I'm actually excited to see. I would love to see 75% of Congress gone the first year. I would love to see the Board of Education gone. I would love to see the FBI gone. And the reason I say those things so matter-of-factly...
Oh, the nuclear development thing is the other thing.
Okay.
That's the thing what you were talking.
So, I mean, the reason why I'm excited to see that is because I'm ready for change. I don't know what that change looks like on the other side of it, whether it is a net positive, you know, because we all have our different opinions on what net negative and net positive would mean. But I'm excited to see.
What is your view about the next, let's make it more interesting. What would you say is your dream scenario if you would literally be able to paint the best world possible in your mind? And you can also add a lot of blows and whistles, like, I don't know, some extravagant shit that doesn't necessarily make our life better, but makes our life way more awesome. A space elevator, I don't care. Politically, technologically, whatever it is. By, let's not go too far because I think it's going to be very hard to predict. Let's say by 2030. What do you see? What is that perfect world that Ben would love to live in?
So just the world, not how we get there.
Oh, you can expand on that, but first give me the bullet points. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. It's interesting. So by 2030, you know, I'll probably get some pushback for this, but I'm okay with that, is I don't mind us living in a highly technological world. I do have some questions about the safety of EMFs. I do have some questions about some curiosities, more or less, about a world that is being now born into high technology, social media, algorithms that parse information for some groups but not for other groups, algorithms and digital twinning, sentient world simulation that takes in real-time data, collages it together, and predicts future behaviors and stuff like that. All of this sounds amazing to me. We would just have to solve for that one element, and that one element is not just people that want to have control and power over people and will do deceptive things to get there. It's also the skepticism that people have that a beautiful world is possible at all. So how do we solve for those two things?
I agree, by the way.
Yeah.
That's a very, very strong point.
You know, I mean, like, obviously there's corruption in the world, and I think, like, let me call myself out here. Even I go too far calling out all the corruption in the world when I could be spending my time talking about all the awesome shit that's being developed right now. I have found myself in a lane, in a way, and breaking out of that lane is like breaking old neurology that's just so grooved. So I do believe that it needs to be a simultaneous transparency of all sides, not just, I mean, because I think the scare for most people is there will be, all of our privacy is going to go away and everything we do is going to be transparent. But the people who get the data, the people at the top, the 0.01%, will never have transparency on them. That's a skeptical view that I think is not entirely correct, but it's not entirely rooted in fiction. So there is an economic 1%. They do get to see a lot of data about us. They make inferences on what that data means, and we are placed inside categories, and algorithms parse what kind of information and kinds of loans and job opportunities might arise for us. This is something that is a big problem for a highly technological world.
Unless that slice exists in a space that is way beyond of the best version of what we have already now. So like, just to cut into that for just a split second, George Carlin, who was one of my favorites by far, I remember there was a bit that he was running about, let me tell you about your rights. You remember that?
Yeah.
Right. And then you have the right for like 13 bagels, right? So in my mind, as much as I love George Carlin, I'm saying, well, wait a second. If everything else, the opportunities that we have existing, there, as let's say we have now for upper middle class and higher, and that's the 13 bagels, okay, there's no problem with that. It's like, yeah, there's more, you can go to more, but that's okay. Like, I don't see a problem with that at all. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world in which, a giant percentage of the population is like below poverty line, and, not even talking about like Africa and what's going on there. So we're not in that world. But if we would be, me personally, I would say that I'm fine with that. There's no problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I just want to remind transparency is one, and a healing, an opportunity for healing. And I want to make sure I get back to that point, an opportunity for healing. But just as my own interjection, because of what you said there, I feel that for the most part, most conspiracy theorists, most people who are just disenfranchised by power and authority, they're living in a world where they don't understand how dangerous the 99% can be. And I say that not to point more fingers, but what I'm saying is, if you are in authority, if you somehow, it doesn't matter if you were born into the family and you were born into billions and you were born into power and you were born into a lot of data, let's put all that aside. Just to have to make and hold and enforce laws to keep the 100%, let's say all of us, to keep 100% of people in check, you're always going to get some people that is going to say it's unfair, that's going to say it's targeting, when maybe the intention wasn't to target. It was just, it slipped my mind that framing it this way could actually disadvantage you. My intention wasn't to disadvantage you. Let's fix that now. That is the ascent of democracy and humanity. We're not a perfect world. Many people are pissed that we're not perfect. And they have a very short attention span, believing that only, let's say, black people have been slaves, when the term slave comes from Slavs, which were white people held by Spanish Muslims in Spain. And, everyone's been held slave. Everyone's been pushed off their land. If you really knew what it was like back with the Mongols pushing people off their land, what happens today is, it's a cakewalk compared to that. So I want to balance what most people believe, thinking that we're being fucked left and right every single chance, we're being screwed. I'm like, no, we're living in an imperfect democracy where a singular system, and an economic system, is governing 360 million Americans, and there's various other ones controlling like 1 billion in China, roughly the same amount in India. It's not easy to have a singular economic system governing people on such a massive scale, because not long ago in history, most gatherings of people didn't go more than Dunbar's number, which is 150 people. So, and then civilizations came, and then laws had to govern those people, and then cities. What's a city? You never had people outside your color or your belief system in the same space as you that wasn't an enemy. Now you have cities, and there's diversity, and there's all this stuff. We live in such a complex world that most people have no understanding how hard it is to actually get bureaucracy to be fair. It's very difficult. So with that being said, that's where transparency and illumination with the transparency needs to come into play. We don't see the playing field because it's hard for a single person to understand the entire playing field. We're looking at a very complex machine, thinking that we understand it, and then saying, yeah, we just need to get rid of Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and you don't know that that's going to change anything, which is my only critique to Vivek, saying, I wonder if you know what you're doing by massive, wide sweeping changes. I'm not saying you don't, and you probably know it more than I do, but I wonder if you know, because you're talking to people that have a very small understanding of a very complex machine. Back to healing. Transparency is the one way to go. We need, and this is why it's irritating, and this is why I don't leave conspiracy theory alone, because transparency, in the name of transparency. But from that point, there needs to be a healing. And there can't be so much skepticism. We need to heal some of the deep-rooted skepticism that will not go away until that person's driving a Porsche and doesn't have any money worries. That's not the world we live in. I don't think by 2030 that's the world we're going to be living in. If we had more transparency, people might feel and understand the world a little bit more as it is, so they don't feel like it's being done to them personally, but they're inside of a machine that nobody is in control of. Some people maybe have more hands on the wheel than others, but no one singular entity, person, group, or nation is in charge of this machine. So that's even scarier if you think about it, that there's this machine swallowing our ecology in the name of economy, and no one singular entity is driving this thing. So how do we heal? That's the number one thing above and beyond transparency that I'm trying to get to by 2030, is we need to remind people that we don't even have enough time to take a breather. Economically, 50 years ago, you could have a housewife, right, that just cooked, and your husband could be a carpenter, and you could feed a family of 5 or 6. Nowadays, kidding me? One of the reasons for the feminist movement, if you look at it from an economic angle, was we don't have enough women in the workforce and we need a strong economy if we're going to keep them commies out of here. So get the women in the workplace. Same thing with smoking cigarettes. They make it seem all rad and cool, and it's like, don't do what authority tells you. Smoke if you're a woman.
What was it? Torches of freedom or something? That was the term.
Yeah, torches of freedom. Yeah. So it's like, again, economics. A lot of the nuances and the intricate conspiracies go away when you understand economics.
That's actually a really good point. That's a great soundbite too.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
It is. And so, like, it makes a little bit more sense of the machine that we've been building since the dawn of civilization. It's been getting more sophisticated, just like our money, just like all our tools, just like, you know, how we disseminate information. But we're still dealing with the same root issues. Tribe, other tribe. I don't know if I trust you. First thing that happens in my mind, it was in this book called The Human Brand, because we do it with brands as well. How powerful are you, and what are your intentions? What are your intentions, and what capacity do you have to get what you intend? Because if you see an animal charging at you and it seems very, very angry, it matters how much capacity they have. Is it an ant or is it an elephant? That matters. Their capacity to cause you harm matters. Their intention also matters, which is why sometimes when fire ants are attacking you and an elephant's out in the distance, you care more about the ants than you do the elephant. So these primal things are still happening inside of us nowadays, where you look at the left, or you look at the right, or you look at China, you look at Russia, and instantaneously you need to make a snap judgment. What are their intentions, and how much potential do they have? So to me, that's when you sweep away all the noise and you get back to, how does this world heal? I think more people need to talk about healing, and we need to make art and something within, and when I say talk about healing, RFK was even talking about this. We need to heal from this onslaught of history where we can't tell if our own government has our own back. We can't tell anymore. And there are a lot of Americans, a lot of people in the government that I'm sure they're like, I want a beautiful country. I trust and I want to protect this nation. And there's a small, maybe sliver of the population that are just opportunists. And the 99% thinks that all government is that tiny sliver of the government just being opportunists. Again, how do we heal that? We need to talk about it and bring transparency. Listen, this is what's been happening. Let's talk about it. So you can tell that we're finally getting to real talk. This isn't a political talking point. I'm not bullshitting you so you vote for me. We need transparency. I think the healing comes from things that are way outside most people's comfort zone. And I would say we need ceremony. legit ceremony. We need economic vacation, and not this, well, we need economic growth, 2 to 3% is great year by year. No, we have the ability to stop and have a mourning period for everyone that we lost due to COVID, everyone that we lost due to whatever, everyone, all the structural injustices that we see. We need a moment just to breathe, because if you think of an individual, what would you tell somebody that just broke their leg or they're really sick and they're trying to get back to work? What would you tell them?
Oh, I mean, obviously, if I would be on my best day, I would, first of all, show compassion towards the situation and tell them, hey, or even keep resting for a little longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You illuminate the situation. I don't know if you're thinking clearly. You're really sick. You're going to be more productive if you just rest up, then get back to work. I think the same thing goes for culture. We need some kind of a pause, because when history feels like it's accelerating too much, it's like a psychedelic coming on too fast. It could even be pleasure that's coming on too fast. You could be like, I don't know if this is sustainable. I don't know how I feel about this. It's just too fast. We need a pause. We need to treat it like ceremony. It needs to be for the expressed interest of healing and taking a breather from the fast pace of economic realities that are pushing us past our comfort zone, causing for us to not see our children, not settle into daily life. We're trying to make as much money as possible because it's the only way we think we can retire one day. We need a pause, and we need to heal. And then on top of that, if I were being really, really honest, but now really, really new age in many people's minds, I think if we were to bring song and dance on a cultural level back, singing in the streets even. It doesn't even need to be organized. It might just naturally emerge. But singing, dancing, back to those roots, I think we will notice more real psychological orientation and healing in the masses than any pharmaceutical, than any forced governmental mandate, anything. I think that the healing would come by treating people like adults. Finally, because I do not believe that we've been treated like adults. We're treated like the state knows more than we do, and we should bow at every corner. Everything that they say, we should bow. You're conspiracy theorists if you even question authority because they have more data than you, just bow. That's how people feel. Even if it's not the truth, that's how people feel.
Yeah, so being treated like adults and being allowed to behave like children when we need to let loose, and it shouldn't be weird.
Yeah.
And actually, just a small thing on that, I just saw a show about the blue zones. Did you see that one?
No, Rich told me about that.
You should watch it. It's wonderful. I don't remember what it's called. I'll put the thing. But basically, the conclusion there, when you combine all the things, is that there's a few common denominators, but one of the biggest ones, I would say one that contributes probably 80%, is the social cohesion.
Totally.
It's that they're all just about, and you can see they're a word that I don't even think in the American culture we even ever think about as adults, but they are joyful. Mm-hmm. You can see joy. They're like laughing in a way that is like a kid, like a joyful thing. They just play together, even when they're 102.
Yeah.
It's like, it's that, so everything you're saying has very deep merit, and actually, because the point there is that he basically learns the model and now he tries to apply it in different places in the United States, right, which is amazing. But yeah, so just wanted to show support to your point, because I think it's exactly on the money. If I never thought about it, but it's such a wonderful idea to like organize things where people just we just went to this place in Florida actually where they have like a daily thing where they just go all to the center and they just like people just like kind of move and dance, and yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, we don't have examples of like joy in the streets as much as we used to. We have festivals and stuff like that, and these are great. And I'm not saying that they're worthless. I'm saying that I think, when I see China and they're doing these national dances, and songs and stuff like that, and people are like, oh, look at all the brainwashing. You know what I see? I see tradition at work. It's tradition at work. And much of what the conservatives want is to hold some tradition as sacred. And much of what the progressives want is for us to progress. Let's branch out. Let's try new things. Much of what the progressives see about the conservatives are dogma. You're so religious or you're so traditional that you don't want to change at all. And much of what the conservatives see about the progressives is you're trying to change so quickly that throw everything away, throw all the morals, throw all the ethics away. And in truth, more conservatives have a progressive side to them that they don't admit, or they just don't categorize that way. In the same way, vice versa. We're actually so much more similar and so much more on the same page, but we don't see the art that highlights it and reflects it. That's why I think that we need to make more art, and we need to treat art as something that isn't just a luxury. It is an aspect of consciousness, both individual and collective. And when exercised, it allows for us to put art out there in the world and others to critique it, because it's an externalization of our mind. And so they critique it, and then we, if we have the proper support inside and outside, we can take their critique and be like, you know what, you're right. You're right. That does reflect that about me. Thank you, mirror. You showed me something about myself. But right now, what we're given is not quite that. It feels like Hollywood. It feels like the legacy media. It feels like most of the main influencers out there are driven by something that we can't stand: money, greed, corruption, not being fully honest about something, always having some kind of like sale going on underneath the surface. That's partly true, and we also need to let down our guard a little bit and see that this is just the way it is. We should stop attacking people for having fit into a world that is this economic world. So the Bill Gates of the world, is he a villain, or is he somebody that just kind of rose to power? And yeah, he drank some of the Kool-Aid like we all do. And yeah, he has some ideas that I don't know if I'm on board with, blocking out the sun so we cool the earth, releasing mosquitoes in Florida that are genetically modified to keep the mosquito populations down, vaccinating most of the world and rushing products to market that we don't have 20, 30 years of real robust studies on. Okay, we can see how he might be wrong, but who's not wrong? That's my point. That's why I don't attack Bill Gates. That's why I'm not attacking people. I might every now and then show that the UN, they need to, they need to answer some questions. BlackRock, they need to answer some questions. And the reason why I think conspiracy is okay to bring up is because if I were to remove my voice from the equation, what would happen?
Yeah, no, definitely. So transparency, healing. Mm-hmm. Actually, on the transparency front, I had this idea a long time ago that if we can manage to, another thing that scares a lot of people, but if we can connect a thing like Neuralink to some kind of a thing that registers mood. So imagine the Twitter of Neuralink. So it literally measures the actual mood of most people in that region, and you can do elections this way.
Yeah.
Because you can actually see what people really, really feel about this particular thing or that particular thing. And you can essentially upvote or downvote things just like by your state, essentially.
I think that's coming.
Yeah.
And really, one of the reasons why I said 2024, we're not going to have another president, I wasn't the first person who said that. And actually, what the heck is his name? He's the guy behind The Social Dilemma.
Oh, Tristan Harris.
Tristan Harris and some other fellow, it was after ChatGPT came out, all these large language models, mm-hmm. and they were saying that I think it might have been 2020, by 2028, there will be no more human presidents. The whole system will have changed by then. So they were saying that in all earnestness. They were very serious about it. And I've heard other people also kind of like toying with this idea that, I don't know if you've ever heard of the fourth turning, this concept that every 80 to 90 years there's a major economic crisis, and in that there's something big that changes the way things are done afterwards. And so technically, if you look on that map, we are right in the middle of one, having started around 2008, going to about 2028. It never lasts longer than 20 years, never shorter than 15. And the greatest weapons of war are always used. And some are still waiting to see like something more big, bad, and awesome than, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When I think that, like, really, if you're thinking about it, we're not attacking other people, and it's not a weapon of war, but it is being waged on us. It's technology. And we scarcely understand the impact of social media on elections. If you change things that drastically in the number one superpower in a world where macroeconomic blocks means that one change here affects millions and millions of people elsewhere, what does that mean when we may not have a president by 2024 or 2028? I think that's very interesting. And I also think that it's a ripe time for large-scale change to happen.
Well, I just to push very, very quickly there, push back on that, I do think I see these technologies as extensions of us. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, they will, and obviously there's this very adamant ongoing debate about, the dangers of AI.
Right.
Can we achieve alignment, all that stuff, right? I do think that in the end, they are just an extension of us. And in that sense, I actually imagine that what we're about to realize is actually, it's not even that they're going to replace us, not replace us. We are AGI. We are it. It's just that these are extensions. These are all of a sudden extra functions that we discovered, and we will integrate with them and achieve full completion of this stage. So it's almost like I always envision it like these are the wings that we've built that we so far just running around like a kite with. Mm-hmm. They're all external, right? But then eventually we'll learn how to wear them. So imagine ChatGPT in your brain, right? So like the fear is all the obvious things, right? It's going to take our jobs, all that stuff. But the truth is that if you look at the possibilities, literally your imagination is the only limit. Like if you play with ChatGPT right now to create an app, you've never created an app, you can just ask it about a code. You can literally there's no limit aside from what you can imagine. Right. So that's the only, it's not that I don't understand the dangers of it. It's just that I feel like, for example, specifically with Tristan. Yeah. I know you're not using him as a big example, but he represents a very large voice in that space. And I do feel that what he's doing is actually damaging in the sense that he's not offering real solutions. He's just saying there's a big problem here. And the problem with that is, like you said, most people don't have the bandwidth. People will listen to him because he's in that space, even though, to be quite frank, he never did research in that field. So he doesn't actually understand the moves there. But I do think he's doing damage in the sense that he is offering, not fear-mongering, but he's offering a serious enough of a concern for people who will not check anything beyond what he's saying. Right. And now they never, play with ChatGPT, they never interact with these things. All they know is what he said. It will create a screen for them to want to interact with these things less, when in reality, what they want to do is to start playing with these things as early as possible and understand them, so they will get a chance to get with the program, so to speak, like to actually become part of this new thing. Because again, the Walmart workers who are 50 now, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them are extremely capable people. They just never found the right opportunity to do the thing. This is their chance. Yeah. But because they heard that, they might go, no, and they will actually be left behind. So that's kind of like the where I see that kind of, it's a very shifty ground, and I admit that it's not an easy conversation to have. Yeah. And you definitely should talk about the potential dangers. However, I do feel that Tristan, from the beginning, he constantly paints this kind of like pretty grim picture. Yeah. I don't think it's not that the social dilemma, right? It's not that the social media doesn't have its problems, but you have to look at the larger potential. There are things that I think that can contribute to us.
I totally agree. There's a couple points you made there. Like one of them is that AI is an extension of us. So was the bomb that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right. So is a pencil, right? These are ways that we use our environment, which we believe is not us. We believe it's other. I'm this and that's other. And we utilize those as tools to get more of what it is that we're actually aiming for. And in many ways, that's why we spend a lot of money on weaponry. We spend a lot of money on transportation. We spend a lot of money on gadgets and tools that do things for us that are far easier. And I don't even go out there, actually, when it comes to like the large language models, I'm far more fascinated than I am worried. I think that one thing that technology in that sense is doing is merging with us as much as we are merging with it. Because you were saying right now, it used to be in very elite computers. Now it's in very commercially, wide application computers in everyone's homes. It's phones in our hands that have more compute power than, the original Apollo mission, I think. Mm-hmm. And now we have applications that we can run on it that can make code, make websites in real time. We can give it agency in certain areas, not all areas. I think that's actually brilliant, and I think that's the direction that we're going. So I'm not a catastrophist. I'm actually not, and I'm not worried. I'm not sitting here shitting my pants because of CBDCs or, Agenda 21 and stuff like that. I don't actually get all emotionally worked up because I see it coming to pass, and I don't really see a reason why it shouldn't. When I'm talking about what it shouldn't, I'm talking specifically about technology being more infused with our lives. The reason why I brought up Agenda 21 is because the main push is to get us inside smart houses, which are like devices. Right now, there are applications being able to use Wi-Fi routers where you can map three-dimensional space that the router's sitting in. So you can see into somebody's home. It's not that that's wide scale being used, but the ability is there. In the same way that we've had phones for quite some time, and people put them in their back pocket and they walk. There's a gyro inside there that kind of shows where it is in space and time. And Max Little at Aston University started retroactively taking that data and applying it to things like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, neurocognitive decline, and started to notice that with that data, he was able to pick up on early onset Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia well before and well more accurately than doctors giving a screening to somebody. So that is the use of technology with applications and data that's already existent. Nothing new has to be invented. I think all the solutions that we have, or all the solutions that we need for the problems that we're making out of the world, are existent. They're right here, they're right now. And I won't go on to some tirade about this, but I do feel when people are like, Ben, how do you stay so calm and relaxed about some of the things that you're bringing up in the news? And I'm like, I'm not worried about it. And if I were to ask the question, who's really responsible? Who's responsible for Maui? Who's responsible for Agenda 21? Who's really responsible? You can give all the small answers, but the big answer is God. And what is God? I don't know.
Or the beginning of the universe, whatever, yeah.
I won't say what I believe God truly is. I know I have a gnosis that there is something beyond myself. But to me, that thing that is beyond, I don't believe anything's outside of the realm of God. So who's responsible for, the Maui fires? God. Who's responsible for Russia invading Ukraine? God. It's not a cop-out. It's not an easy way of just saying, oh, well, then nothing really ever matters.
Yeah, so how do you reconcile that? What is the significance of seeing it as that? Because there's a gnosis and there's a feeling in you that in the end, it's all for the better kind of thing?
Yeah, and to me, it's a tool. Going back to, I don't have convictions, right? I have tools. And I play around with the tools, and even if a tool worked well for me 2 weeks ago, being really witty and really sassy, that worked for me 2 weeks ago. I whip it out now and it doesn't really work. I understand how a tool can be brought out by the moment at hand. Just like RFK would not have worked the last presidency, but he will this time around, right? Because of the vaccine debate. I really do believe that when I'm mentioning that God, this is all just God playing itself out. How that doesn't turn into a cop-out is I realize that I don't understand God, nor am I fully convinced that I'm right when I say that this is all just in the hands of God, who's responsible for Maui, all that kind of stuff. But it is a useful tool because I'm more concerned about where my nervous system is at as I'm making decisions, as I'm building my worldview. I'm more concerned about my own nervous system than how do I fact check whether that fact that I'm using to build my worldview is correct. Right? I'm not worried, and yes, it's good, make sure each brick in a building, in a foundation, is going to stand the test of time. But to me, it's much more about the design. So in that, when I'm taking a look at the dangers of AI and the dangers that we're all facing, I'm not so dismayed by it. It's not touching my amygdala and making me go into freeze, fight, or flight. It's actually turning me into an artist, way back when I watched Zeitgeist. I wasn't shitting my pants about the state of the world. I was like, ooh, how can I turn this into a piece of art? That to me is the artist spirit that we all have, and we have the spirit to solve all the problems. We have the spirit to do it. We have the intelligence to do it. We have the resources to do it. What we don't have is the conversation, the transparency, and the opportunity to heal.
Well, I guess for me, it's a very similar, what you're describing God as a tool. To me, it's understanding. And I really like your counterexample with the bomb, because it reminds us that even though a lot of these things, if not all of them, are extensions of us, nevertheless, some extensions of us can come and punch us in the face. The only distinction I would draw there is that the two things. The bomb was created to be a bomb, and AI was not created to be that. So there's like a telos there that's different. And also, but the bomb was only available to a very small percentage of people, of part of an entity. And this is literally the most democratic thing you could possibly imagine. So I guess that's the two things that mitigate that comparison for me. But I actually like that comparison. It's a good reminder that we can also create monsters for sure. It's not all going always towards the rosy future. But I guess for me, the understanding of the deeper thing is always part of the growth. And the current understanding of the deeper thing for me personally is that even calling it a technology is already confusing, because it immediately places it as a thing that we interact with, versus this is literally information evolving as it was from the beginning of time. It's completely natural, and it found through us another way, a silicon way to move in a more abundant way and do things that are way more novel, which as Terrence believed, the universe is a novelty producing machine. I believe that as well. And to be honest, at the end of that line, if I have to ask myself why I'm not even concerned even about the dangers, I don't know how to explain it. I didn't reason myself into this, but I have this sense that experience and consciousness is more important than we are. And if it can be on a higher level than us, I don't believe that's what's going to happen, because I do believe that if you ask yourself, how long does it take an AGI to become aware that it is an AGI in physical matter? The answer is 4 billion years on Earth. That's just what happened. That's until you become fully aware that that's what you're full-fledged, right?
Yeah.
But even if the worst case scenario for us humans was like there's no alignment and the thing, I'm wrong and we're not AGI, and actually AGI is a thing, like it's Skynet essentially.
Yeah.
If that's the case, but Skynet is capable of greater beauty, so be it. It's our time. Like, I don't know why. I'm just like, okay, we had a good run. Like, it's not that I don't have a self-preservation impulse. Is that I think that the ability, if it's completely dead inside and there's no one home, and that would be a catastrophe. It just takes over the galaxy as a paperclip maximizer, which I think is actually a little bit of a silly argument. But let's say that, then I agree. Then it's a disaster. But if it's capable of conscious states that we can't even fathom, and it means that we need to be eradicated, then I say okay. Like, I don't know why, but I don't think that's where we're going actually.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And honestly, this is why I don't really have a nervousness around it, because I feel like it's in the hands of God is one way to say it, or it's just playing itself out the way that it's going to play itself out. You mentioned the bomb was made to be a bomb and is held in few hands. The ChatGPT was not made to harm people. I fully believe that. And it was given out, democratized to many, many people. A question that I would have, and this isn't actually even a pushback, it's just a further investigation of it, is do you feel safer with the power of a bomb in the hands of the elite or in the hands of the 99%? In the hands of the 1% or the hands of the 99%?
Great point, actually.
And what makes something into a weapon? Like a hammer can kill somebody or it can build a home. And obviously a bomb, like you could use it as a table, but so it's like super...
Well, I would go, the answer for me would be in the nuances, which is that we have to further break down the analogy, because the bomb it's almost like a binary. It's just like it goes off or it doesn't go off, and if it goes off, there's only one outcome.
Right.
But with this, it's much more nuanced, because the tool, in order to actually to work for or against something, it has to go through a lot of steps in the middle. And in this case, I would prefer it more spread out, because there's going to be a lot more people to potentially counter whatever
Right, right.
That just in that
and that
sense.
was just one part of
Yeah.
the investigation. Again, I'm investigating these things as
I'm
well.
very open to it, yeah.
And so, like, democratizing more power to the 99%. I said earlier that, like, I wouldn't say that the 1% is that much more dangerous than the 99%. It feels like there is some balance that hasn't eradicated us yet, in a sense. So I'm not so worried about these outlandish, I shouldn't call them outlandish, but these ideas that if we do this, the slippery slope is we're all going to be dead in 5 years, because I've heard that way too many times. So ChatGPT is empowering people. And the thing that I like about that is I think it's an awakening tool. And so was the bomb. It was just very acute how it awakens us. Like, whoa, we have the power to do that much damage based upon a decision. Obviously, you have to have the thing, but then once you have the thing, it's just a decision. It's just a couple humans in a room that can make that decision. And now you're democratizing ChatGPT out to the world. The 99% that I believe we focus, or we make decisions based on groupthink a lot, and oftentimes not really good logic. We're not even sure the assumptions that we're basing all our decisions off of. I think it's really smart to put things like ChatGPT in the hands of people, because it is an awakening tool. And I think that awakening aspect of it, there's already skepticism. Oh, it's lying, or it's not giving the right information, is biased. It's just like, stop focusing on the little tiny things that it could be perfect on, and take a look at the things you can already right now do with it, and it's incredible. And to me, that's why I believe that this is just the direction that we're meant to be headed in. Here's where I think the future of it is going. I think it's going to merge. As you can see, computers got smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually, you're going to want to stop holding something in your hand. You want to stop having to do this or this. You are going to want to just think of a command and get the information all of a sudden.
Integration, yeah.
Integration, all the way down to the cellular level. And that's where most of the conspiracies of transhumanism comes up, is they're trying to colonize us all the way down. And there's always this they're trying to colonize us all the way down to the molecular level. And I would say, I agree, but it's not they, it's we. We are doing this. And like, I think to kind of top off everything that we've been saying, when I talk about conspiracy, even when I'm talking about a specific conspiracy, I still say it's carried by God. And in that respect, that's the we that I'm talking about. So we are going through this transformation. And I believe the reason why the reason why I talk about the stuff that I talk about is for the transparency part of the two-pronged solution. I believe transparency, like, it's like not talking about it isn't the right way to go either. You know, so talking about it, it irritates people, it triggers people, it misinforms people. Yeah, not talking about it, you're not solving any of those problems. So transparency and being not proud, but not feeling scared to use your voice and believe what you believe, because we're self-censoring all around the block. We're self-censoring things that we say, like, oh, this person could get upset if I use this word, or if I start talking about a topic, that person's going to get upset. So we start doing all this self-censoring. This is why I like comedy. Let's bring it up. It'll help diffuse it, I promise, as long as we have a moment to stop and pause and gain perspective on what it is that's even happening, because we are in this historical acceleration point. And if we don't take time to just pause, just like, did you ever see the movie, what was the one with Bruce Willis where they were going to go up and blow the asteroid up, Ben Affleck?
Oh, Armageddon.
Yeah, Armageddon. Right before they were training, and then they were going to go out into outer space, and Bruce Willis was like, they need a night off. And they were like, no, absolutely not. And they were like, listen, they're not going to do the job, not just on will, but even unwillfully. They won't be in the right space to do the job if you don't give them a moment to breathe. Just be normal again. They're about to risk their lives for humanity. Give them a moment to breathe. I think we're in the same exact space in history, but it's all of humanity.
Let's take a moment to breathe.
We're generating enemies where there are none. We're creating problems. We're using apophenia to connect dots that aren't really there. We're overactive. This is what the mind does when we don't feel safe and we're looking around and everything doesn't feel safe. Sometimes you just need to tell the child, just breathe. I know this is scary. I know this all is changing so quickly and you feel like everything that you could hold on to feel safe is vanishing right now. But we need a moment to breathe, to gain perspective on how quickly this technology is accelerating, because this technology, as you rightly said, is an extension of us. So something about us is accelerating. And this may be the trigger thing that helps us accelerate, but we need that breather. We need that moment. And if I were to put it in plant medicine terms, it's why when you go into the ayahuasca setting or the peyote setting, there's this moment of silence where you all just kind of sit on your mat and you just chill. You don't do anything. You're not on your phone. You might have a little conversation, but it's really about just going inward. Why is that important? Why is it good not to be like, no, I'll take the ayahuasca in a second. I'm just catching up on my news, or I need to write this thesis real quick. That's the most terrible space to go into an ayahuasca journey.
The Russians have
racing.
The Russians have a little ceremony before you leave the house, especially for a long trip.
Yeah.
Where everybody comes and just sits for a minute. After you pack, you're ready to leave the door.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just sit for a minute. No, like, and it kind of resets the whole thing. Because the people always rush out.
You can't gain perspective in a
rush. That's a beautiful point. I really love this vision. I actually didn't think of that, which is like, before we create ChatGPT-5, how about we create an actual thing that we all agree that we're going to do, which is that breather. Like,
yeah.
Can we all take a breath before we dive into this crazy hyperspace, whatever it is?
Yeah.
I'm in full agreement with that. And in fact, I think that part of the way forward and the solution to enter this crazy technological and space age is, the giant portion of it is healing. Because because the truth is, there will always be, for any technology you develop, there will always be some kind of danger attached to it, always. So you either trust, love, that it's going to bring you to the next thing, or you're afraid of it. And the more you're afraid of it, the more the interaction is always not going to be, exactly what it needs to be. There's definitely not going to be that much of an alignment or integration, because you're constantly going to be fighting it.
Yeah.
So I really, really love that vision.
And I also, just to put a pin in that, I kind of feel that the reason why I don't fully not believe that by 2024 or 2028 we may have a brand new kind of a system is because what is democratizing? What is the process of democratizing other than giving voice? And in that voice, it's part of your power, your uniqueness.
Equalizing power.
So like all the way back to Akhenaten, when he just refused to make statues and images of him as a warrior, as someone higher, holier than thou. It was him with his arm around his wife and his daughter playing on his lap. Right? And then you get to Solon, who is like, this money thing needs to really be, democratized a little bit more. And he started doing things financially that were democratizing, leveling the playing field, giving power back to the people, all the way up to the Industrial Revolution. Now, the average person can drive in a car, whereas kings just 30 years ago, or even still at that time, were going by horseback. You're democratizing power and giving it back. So now in this day, the reason why I think it's really important for us to take a look at what big transformation we are undergoing, but are about to start, it's going to dawn on us very much so as a species coming soon, is as we democratize and give voice to people, that means we got to listen. We also may not like what we hear when it's democratized back to us. And I do believe this whole concept of social media and using technology to congregate and gather data very quickly and then display to the world on a blockchain where it's inviolable, far more inviolable at least, what people would actually vote for. Vote through blockchain, and here is how to verify it was not only you, but that it was fully embodied in you, like how you were feeling. Because we may not like whatever we've just voted for. We may not. But I know that we just got rid of our bunnies as pets.
That's a very sad sentence.
I have an 8-year-old daughter, obviously a wife, and twin 4-year-old boys. Some would just say, Ben, just be the man of the house and get rid of the bunnies. But I didn't do that. Everyone in this house, this is an opportunity for them to understand what I believe the world must go through. We use our voice, and we as a collective, we're going to make a decision together. No one, doesn't matter how much money you have, how old you are, what part of the world you come from, what your beliefs are, does not matter. Equal amount of voting power. And we're going to vote on this. Are we keeping the bunnies? Are we getting rid of them? We can lay out some of the facts, but at the end of the day, you kids have more voting power than mom and I. That allowed them to make the decision and know that the next step, whether they're sad about it because the bunnies are gone or not, we decided.
That's amazing.
So we must democratize our voice. It's inevitable to me. I believe that all this technology that's democratizing power back in the hands of the people, it's inevitable, and we are doing it. But it's very important that we get to see we voted for this future that's coming. It's on the blockchain, and as much as I don't like it, it's the same reason why, some people like, I can't stand Trump, but he is our president, and we're going to listen to him the way we would any other president. Same thing with Biden. It's like, you know what, and some would say, it was a stolen election. For the past 30 years, every election has been claimed to be stolen. And I would imagine because fraud happens every single time. Maybe not on a level that completely throws the election, but I don't even care about that argument. The president is the president, treat him like the president. And I only use that as a way to say that if we get rid of the curiosity around whether this was stolen or not, if we can see inviolably on blockchain that we voted for this, then at least we know, well, I had agency and I did use my voice, and I didn't get what I wanted, or I got what I wanted and it wasn't what I was thinking. That's how we can start to heal some of this animosity, because one of the main reasons people are driven into the arms of conspiracy theory is because they don't feel like they have agency. They feel like their agency, their freedom, their word, their voice, everything's being stripped from them. So to me, that's why I like where technology is headed. And that's why if we go through some radical transformation where the Constitution is swept away, where the voting process is democratized, it's all online, there are no presidents, we do voting for every legislation by unanimous decision, or not unanimous, but countrywide, unless it's just a state and what's happening there, you let everybody vote on everything. And that way we know, you had a choice, you had agency, and you voted towards it. Same way my kids voted towards getting rid of the bunnies. They're sad. We all cried when we got back to the house. We got rid of our bunnies. They're our family. But guess what? We all had equal voting power. And that's why my kids aren't blaming me for getting rid of the bunny.
Smart.
Because we all got to do it. It was a little bit because of that smart move, but it's an example of how we could be doing things.
Yeah, and also it's the birth of responsibility. People will feel that there's more for them. And by the way, speaking of God, when I had my ayahuasca ceremony, I remember I had this moment where I asked to see a thing, and I asked her to be more visual because I learned more visually. And she said, no problem. And actually that was amazing to me because she became DMT, full-on DMT, which was incredible. And then I saw that it was one shade of purple. I just know the DMT space so well, obviously all happening in my mind. But I was like, wait, that's it was a little off from the purple that I know with DMT. And she immediately looked at me and she's like, she knows what I want. So she's like, oh, come on. She's like, that's the best I could do. I'm not DMT, but that's the best I could do. And then I realized, wait, she's not perfect. She's learning from this as much as I'm learning from her. And then she's like, she just winked back at me. I was like, birth of responsibility. She's like, this is not just you come here and you sit and I go, right. This is a relationship. The reason I know so much is because I've had all these relationships. Yeah. And now I understand. But you're little you. Right now, I had a moment with you that I've never had with anyone else. But we both learned something. But that wink was like, oh, even if we believe in God, it's not just, and I know you're not saying that, but it's not throw all. It's, you still have a lot of responsibility to do things a certain way on your level.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is even cannabis is one of the oldest sacraments known to man, the way that it's been traded around the world through the Silk Road, from China into Africa, throughout Europe, into the New World. I think of the fact that that's a technology. It's a really interesting technology. Michael Pollan posited whether we're cultivating it or it's cultivating us. It's an interesting thought, and it really does get at the root philosophical concept of what is myself and what is other. Here's a plant that's communing with me and millions of other people, ayahuasca, DMT, and it's had relationships. It's been inside all these bodies, tinkering with all these minds. It's very interesting that in itself is a technology. And then you look at the evolution of that. You go from the rocks, which don't move much, but you can say they have, a presence about them, an intelligence, a frequency that they hold. And then there's plants, or you could say the microorganisms, but let's say plants that are stuck in the ground and they're gathering experiences and they change, they go into form and then they die and they wither. But they need to move around more to gather more experience. So then you have these animals that they can lift off the ground, they can eat of the earth to still be connected and rooted, but it's in here, it's in the gut and the soil and the biome. And then humans from there, where our mind can take us out of the moment and we can start, in fact, actually living inside of a world, and our physiology is responding to something that isn't in the reality that others see, but it's a belief system. And we can separate ourselves from that. And I think technology is helping us in that direction, meaning technology was always a part of that process.
It was always implied. And actually, I had this funny thought one time when I was walking in the kitchen and there was a broom, and I mistakenly, but by mistake, I knocked the broom off, and the broom fell. And then I had this thought, what if the broom thought that it decided to fall? What if all of this, it was just being bounced around, just like the broom? But we have all these stories about what the thing is, but the thing is moving us, basically.
This is why I'm a filmmaker, because story drives just about everything. I can't definitively say it drives everything, but it drives just about everything.
It drives everything that matters.
Well, yeah, and any way that you and I are going to come to some kind of a worldview, I have to externalize my world somehow, either by the way I'm acting, by the way I smell, by the way light bounces off of me, or by the way I put it into a piece of art or words. I externalize the mind. You get to interact with that. It can augment you. You can, massage it, whatever, and then you bring it back, and that's a conversation. You take a look at language. I think language is very interesting as it evolves, because you could say 50,000 years ago is when it might have evolved with more complex tools. And then from there, we were only, Dunbar's number, language only evolved to a certain amount. And then we started getting together in cities, and agriculture brought us together in cities where we had to protect this thing. So we need legislation, military, paramilitary to protect it all. So we had to come up with all these inventions for the thing that was happening. And language started evolving into those ways. We have legal language, we have, regular social language, religious language, we have different slang meanings of the same word. And then over time, and I got my timeline off a little bit, but we started making symbols on walls. So externalizing the mind into symbols. And then cave walls. That's very, very old. But we couldn't bring the cave wall with us to show people that are over there that'll never go to our cave. So we made these clay tablets, kind of like the rock wall, but we inscribe it there and then we bring it to them like a hard drive. And then that was too heavy. You could break it and smash, so make it out of paper. Externalize the mind onto paper. And then you could do that to a bunch and then send it into a bunch of different places like that. And then the symbols themselves weren't granular enough, so we break it down into these letters that build words, that build, sentences, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And then we're, in a sense, externalizing the mind onto the physical world and bringing these hard drives, which started as the rock wall, then the clay tablet, then the papyrus, then the Gutenberg press, then all of a sudden it's digitized and we can send information in real time across the globe. As you said before, that's information.
Instantiated in matter.
Absolutely.
That's another point that Deutsch makes, that really that knowledge is an actual thing existing on its own side.
Yeah.
And he even proposed the rule that knowledge, the truer the knowledge, and knowledge defines as information that can do work. And he talks about it in technical terms, but the truer the knowledge, as in the more it reflects what the world is actually doing, so that's what defines it as a knowledge, the more it will cause itself the second you instantiate it in matter, the more it will cause itself to remain so. So like if a unit like ourselves, they can understand knowledge, they can read knowledge and understand what it is, the second it will recognize an important piece of paper, let's say, like it's instantiated in symbols in matter, it will cause you to protect it.
Yeah.
There's a thing there that is beyond you, and it's one thing that really made me stop in my tracks when I heard it. It said it's the only force in the universe, the influence of which does not drop over time. Everything from gravity to like everything, it drops over time and distance. You can have a piece of information on a little hard drive, you can send it to the other side of the galaxy, given that nothing happens to the hard drive that will destroy the knowledge. And if there's something on the other side of the galaxy that can read what's inside, let's say how to build a space station,
right?
A space station will appear on the other side because of this knowledge, and it influenced, it didn't perturb anything in the middle, and it caused a physical structure to appear on the other side of the universe that wouldn't be able to appear there without that knowledge, and the influence of it did not drop over time, which means it's eternal. And another example he uses is said that the only places in the universe where you have, at the moment that we know of, that you have a nuclear reaction is inside of centers of stars and in human labs, where there's a proper knowledge of how to do so.
And what's interesting is you mentioned that there's something that brings me to morphic resonance and things being in the field. And I forget exactly how Rupert Sheldrake was talking about. It was some kind of sugar. It wasn't sucralose. It wasn't aspartame either, but it was some kind of a sweetener that it was always in like liquid form, but then all of a sudden in somebody in one lab did it one time slightly different and it started crystallizing. And from that point, it's the same substance was crystallizing in labs elsewhere because of the morphic field. It's the same thing with information, which is actually why I believe when people believe that there is some fixed external reality that just is, and we just need to wake up to it, and these are the facts, all you got to do is get on with the facts. To me, I think we're more of an artistic world. We are co-creating the world, and the reason why there is some reproducible science is because once you produce the science, that's the first neuronal connection. It's easier to make the same connection a second time after you've made the connection one time. So you can reproduce it over and over and over again, because even in reproducible science, there are some anomalies where it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And also placebo effect. Oftentimes we applaud the pharmaceutical and forget that most pharmaceuticals fail because they can't do as good for you what your own mind can do for you by taking a sugar pill. So there is something about the information, which is why I'm a filmmaker. I love to empower people and cause them to see things from a slightly different view. Because once you realize I'm not an island, this isn't a fact, it's a worldview. When you realize you can kind of move to the side and see it from a different angle, then it leads you to thinking, well, can I move further? Can I move further? What does it feel like to actually take that person's perspective? Which is why I'm constantly looking at the perspective of people that I either don't agree with or that a bunch of people don't agree with. And when I do that, I hear the same thing operating within them. And I start to come to realize that what causes for people to witch hunt against certain people is it's probably a mix of some kind of jealousy and fear and not understanding the power that this person has wielded. And deep down inside, you have to kind of pine over it because you know you're powerful too. If you just surrender and and don't fight back against it at all, to an aspect of your beingness, you are kind of saying, I don't believe that I have similar power, which is why I believe trolls they feel safe online, their face isn't being seen, they're not going to be argued in person, but they want to argue. It's not just because people want to watch the world burn, it's because that's a tiny aspect of bringing agency back. Look at this powerful person, and I don't agree with everything that they say. You notice how every time somebody talks about a politician, I did it, you did it, I bet you everybody does this. I don't agree with everything they say, right? Because that's a part of a social validation. It's just believe me, I've thought deeper than just go for this candidate. We have to validate that. to show that I also have the power of the...
Actually, I don't know a lot of people that offer that caveat, but I'm glad that you live in a world in which a lot of people offer that caveat, yeah.
Well, I mean, and I appreciate that caveat because I'm often looking at who's being demonized and I try to see them more human.
Yeah.
In a way. It doesn't matter if it's their worldview or whatever it might be. People that other people are saying, like, just blanket statements, making like, these people the enemy. I'm like, I want to know what's redeeming about them. I don't care anymore what's so awful about them. Like maybe I'll subconsciously kind of think the same. But once I notice it, that everyone is attacking this one group, I'm like, now I want to know what's really redeeming and beautiful about them. And I want to highlight that aspect of it because otherwise I'm not helping evolve information. I'm just really drilling it down into people's belief and being more convinced that the things that they think are actually true. Like I tell people, like, don't believe everything that you read. Don't believe everything that you think. Everything that you think may not be true. And oftentimes because we've thought it, we think that it has more merit than somebody else's view who thought something different. So I guess that's kind of my ultimate place. My ultimate vision of being a filmmaker is for an hour and a half, I'm going to put people in a space that hopefully by the end of it empowers them. It doesn't turn them into something. The only thing you could say it turns them into is more of themselves if I do my job correctly. If I empower somebody, to get them to see that, if you just change worldview just a tiny little bit, you start to realize that like all the foundations upon your convictions start to crumble. That doesn't have to be so scary. You can utilize that to be like, well, that means I can kind of create the world however I want. And if other people believe the same, holy shit, what if that goes viral? That's the whole point of me being a filmmaker. And that's why I talk about unpopular topics. And that's why I give a twist ending like Fight Club at the end.
I love it, man. Ben, I can't thank you enough, man. This was such an enlightening conversation. And I really hope we get to do this again next time I'm passing by. I'm going to keep following everything you have to put out there because I enjoy it, even when I don't fully agree with it.
I love that you don't fully agree with it either.
No,
I can't stand the pandering sometimes when people are like, "Oh, it's great, it's great." It's like,
I'm actually
tell
very,
me what you're
like,
really
I'm very concrete about this. I really appreciate your work so much. First of all, what is the YouTube channel and the website and everything where people can find you?
Yeah, go to youtube.com/Ben Joseph Stewart. You can go to benjosephstewart.com online and you will see all the links for YouTube, all the socials. Definitely find me on Instagram. I'm not very active on Twitter. I'd like to be a little bit more, but Instagram, I'm definitely on there, and that's where I'm most active talking to people. And I would say that, go to my YouTube channel and watch some of the Waking Infinities and the things that I'm posting. I haven't been super active there lately, but watch it knowing that at least what I'm saying now, I'm not trying to convince you of a worldview, but I definitely believe it's valuable for us to start talking about shit that is uncomfortable. Let's start having more uncomfortable conversations, only if you have the bandwidth to utilize it in a beautiful way.
And by the way, there's nothing more fulfilling than arriving at some kind of a conclusion together with a person you completely disagree with, given that you can admit when you arrive at the bedrock where you see that this is just a worldview that is different.
Right.
And I think that sometimes people lack the ability to just admit that that's the case. They're like, no, my worldview must be that. People need to let go of. It's like, no, like, again, some people want to be in the stars. Some people want to touch the earth every day.
Mm-hmm.
There's no logical thing here. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think that I'm with you 100%. People need to argue better, disagree in a more enjoyable way. And I think I take your point really deeply about the healing and about the bringing back the joy that was painted in the Western world, at least, as naive, childish, all these things. You took out a human component that is not supposed to go anywhere, and you basically disensouled the adult life. It just became this banal thing because you you take time to get fucked up, but you don't take time to actually enjoy the company of others and actual the moment. So that's a beautiful vision that I really love.
Yeah.
Ivan, so once again, thank you so much for doing this. I really deeply appreciate it. A lot of the stuff that you're talking about is very dear to my heart, and I love the fact that there's somebody else reasoning about these things from a slightly different side of the aisle that gives me enough of a recognition that there's other points of view that exist in a way that is constructive and not in a way that is just trying to make a point. So I really appreciate that attitude, and I think we align in many, many ways. And I'm very excited to do this again. So once again, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Yeah, man, this was great. I appreciate it.